Hello, how are you? Good to see you. How's everyone doing? It was a lovely day today in New York City, lovely weather. I went out, I put my mask on, my surgical mask, and I didn't even have to wear my hoodie today. I just wore my white shirt and my running shorts, laced up my athletic shoes, and went for my run. Sweat poured down my face, lovely weather, took a nice shower, and now I am here with all of you. I had a great chat this afternoon before my run with Dust James, the Marxist Leninist trucker. Great friend of the show. I'm sure we'll have him back on. The video is already been posted. Check it out. I'm sure folks are already enjoying it based on the comments. So much we can talk about tonight. But I guess it's time tonight to begin with a big, big high five. I'll even take the pen out of my hand. High five. High five. 10,000 subscribers. 10K. We did it, folks. Whoa. the tripod almost fell down there. We did it. We made it happen. We have had a huge victory for our community. This is a huge victory for our community. Let's not downplay this at all, right? We did this. We made this happen, and we should be very proud of ourselves, right? 10K subscribers. Trying to get this tripod in a space where it won't bounce. There we go. 10K subscribers. It's really, really great. I am really, really delighted that we hit 10K subscribers. And, 20K is just around the corner. The more we gain, the faster we gain. Pretty soon, the whole country is going to be talking about us. I am so excited, and so should you. You should be very excited as well, because we are in this together. You guys are just as much a part of this as I am. Let's face it, right? Every week we sit here, we talk, we engage. I answer your questions, you answer my questions. We go back and forth, we promote this community, we build it, right? We all know to push like every week. We all know to hit the subscribe button. We all know to hit the notifications bell. Make sure we get the notifications, right? We all know that I love super chats, and I will give you an answer. If you give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. And yeah, we are ready to roll. We are happy, and we've hit the ground running. And I don't know if folks heard, I had a great chat on Blue Politics Discord. It was really good. They're going to post it. In the next few days. I also talked to a new YouTube channel called Workers' Liberty. We're going to post that. I'll be posting that soon. They already posted it. But in the Blue Politics chat on Discord, which went very, very well, 2 hours, Ask Me Anything, Q&A, I touched on the fact that the reason that I look for every opportunity to preach socialism, to explain what's wrong with capitalism and why we need a socialist society, is because you never know who might be listening, right? Okay, all right, I'll talk about that. All right, Liam Hicks, Islam, and Marxism. All right. But folks, you never know who might be listening. You never know who might be listening. Right? 10,000 people. Think about what 10,000 people looks like. I don't know if you've ever been at a demonstration with 10,000 people. But think about 10,000 people, what that looks like. That's a big number. Right? I've been at many protests with less than 100 people. I've been many protests with 2,000 people. But imagine, what does a crowd of 10,000 people look like? That's quite a crowd. It's quite a gathering. And we're doing it. We have 10K, right? And we're not getting any help, right? The U.S. State Department, the imperialist troll farms are not helping us out at all. We've earned everything we've got. It's been an uphill battle. The algorithms do not like us, right? There's been a huge effort to push us back in the searches and the view counts, but we are still here. We are still here. We're pushing back, and we are winning. And if you think about 10,000 people, you never know who could be watching. I believe it is very possible that the next Lenin could be watching these broadcasts. I believe it is very possible that the next Che Guevara could be watching these podcasts. I think that the next Martin Luther King or Malcolm X could be watching these videos. It's very, very possible, right? You never know. You never know who is watching, right? I look for every opportunity to preach socialism because you never know the power of your words. In the early 1900s, there was a soapbox agitator who stood on street corners in a major city. I think it was Philadelphia, might have been Seattle. We don't know his name. We're not even sure what organization he was in. He was probably a member of Daniel de Leon's Socialist Labor Party, but we don't even know that for sure. But he stood on a soapbox, right? That's an old wooden box they used to deliver soap. And he stood on this box and preached socialism to people going by. He talked about the workers and the bosses. He talked about exploitation. He talked about imperialism. He talked about profits and capitalism and the need for the workers to own the factories and the means of production to be controlled by society. People went by, and I'm sure there were a lot of people who didn't listen to him, didn't give him the time of day, didn't give this soapbox agitator the time of day, didn't quite care for what he had to say, weren't interested, just kept moving with their lives. But you know, one of the people who was walking by this soapbox agitator was a young man from Philadelphia named William Z. Foster. Believe it or not. And if that soapbox agitator had not stood there on that soapbox and preached socialism and preached about the need for class struggle and talked about the evils of profits in command and billionaire bankers and capitalist overproduction, if that soapbox agitator, we don't know who he was, hadn't done that, imagine how differently history might have turned out. William Z. Foster, who went on to become the great union organizer, the steel strike of 1919, who went on to become the leader of the Communist Party USA, to build the unemployment councils, to lead people in struggle, to build an anti-fascist united front, a huge, huge dramatic contribution. He may never have stepped forward to do what he did if it hadn't been for that soapbox agitator. It hadn't been for that man standing on a street corner. Could have even been a woman. According to the reports, it was a man. It could have been different. But that soapbox agitator made the point of challenging people ideologically, giving people a political message, not a movementist message, not just a kind of an amped up version of whatever the liberals happen to be saying, but a socialist message. And I got to tell you, folks, I feel like what we are doing here on these live broadcasts, on these conversations that we had, lumpen, writing it down, we are the 21st century version of soapbox agitators. We broadcast, we spread our views, we argue our positions, we deal with hecklers, people who disagree with us. We stand there, we put out our viewpoint, we argue, we debate with people who disagree with us, and we put forward the message. We are like the soapbox agitators of the early 1900s, except we have way bigger access. Due to the capitalist technology, more people have the ability to hear what we have to say. And we will not be silenced. And we will keep saying what we have to say. We are going to keep bringing home the message that people should come before profits, right? That greed is not the best we can do. That socialism has been a reality and will be a reality. That the working class will win, and that imperialism is doomed. So we just got to finish it off. Folks, think about how much different the world would be if people didn't do the kind of work that we do. We are carrying on an amazing tradition. We are carrying on the tradition of Eugene Debs. We are carrying on the tradition of all kinds of agitators and organizers and speakers. We are doing great, great things. We are carrying on and building a great tradition. We should be very, very, very proud of the work that we do. Very, very proud of it. And that is how I want to begin our conversation today. I want to give everyone a high five. I want to applaud everyone for the fact that we hit 10K and we are going to just keep rolling ahead. We've got the Discord conversation. Be sure to join the Caleb Maupin CPI Discord conversation. We're going to be building the Center for Political Innovation, a very important think tank that will put forward socialist and anti-imperialist politics. We have a job to do, and we're going to do it well. We're rolling ahead. We're not letting reactionaries get in our way. We're not letting opportunists get in our way. We're not letting the synthetic left get in our way. We're not letting hustlers get in our way. We're not letting grifters get in our way. We're looking forward. We are a community here. We come on here, we talk, we care for each other, we give each other the support we need to get through life in these tough times with pandemics, with unemployment, with opioids, with so much suffering in the world. We give each other the strength we need, the community we need to get through. Human beings are collective creatures, folks. We're not just individualism. Margaret Thatcher said there is no such thing as society. There are only individuals. Well, I got to tell you, the history of humanity shows the opposite. There is only society. Human civilization has always been collective and always will be collective. Every building in the New York City skyline was built by workers. I will definitely get to that, Kinky. Every building in the New York City skyline has been built by workers. Every product at every store was manufactured by workers, delivered by workers. It's sold to you by workers in retail. There is nothing in the world, nothing in the world that anyone can point to and say, I made this by myself. I did it all by myself. Maybe there's a wood carver out there. He says, well, I carved this piece of wood all by myself. Yes, but the tools that you used were made in a factory. And hundreds of people were probably involved in assembling the tools that you used. A painter might say, well, I painted this painting myself. Yes, you did the artistic work. But the paintbrush that you used was assembled in a factory by collective labor. The paint itself was manufactured and made from acrylic and put together, collectively. We work together. That is the story of the human species, is collective labor. Human beings coming together to produce, to create, to coordinate our activities, to invent, to do things that have never been done before, to ask questions, to push forward contradictions. We, the human species, have done amazing, amazing things. We've gone from caves in the woods to space travel. We have the ability, I guess we should say, anti-lockdown, all right, I'll get to it. We have the ability to take rocks and sand and minerals and turn them into iPhones. We have amazing, amazing potential. But the problem is that right now, all of our coordination, all of our efforts are being controlled and utilized for the purpose of making profits for a small group of people that controls the means of production. And that has got to stop. We need human reason, human labor, human creativity, human brilliance to be organized in a rational way. We need the strength of human beings to be forced to serve a higher purpose, to be served the force of rational reason and building a better society, not simply to make profits for a group of people who have a certificate, a piece of paper that says they own it. They own it. Human intelligence, human creativity, human progress is being held back by the greed of a wealthy few. And that's leading to big problems. Our irrational use of resources by different companies that just want to make profits in the short term has created a glut and a crisis of climate change. right? The rivalries and the drive of capitalists to make profits is leading us to war. The efforts to suppress the rise of socialist countries like China is leading us to wars, right? We're stuck on fossil fuels, a prison house for humanity, an inefficient way of doing things because it's profitable for the billionaires and bankers that run the world. Profits and greed is holding us back, and the only way to push back is with popular power. Human beings coming together, standing arm in arm, and fighting for their rights like they always, always have. It must be done. We have no choice. The age of class struggle is upon us. But every time you share one of these videos, every time you hit the like button, you hit the subscribe button, every time you go into Reddit, you post one of these videos, every time you get on Facebook and post one of these videos, every time you tweet out one of these links and say, "What, you got to join this conversation. Did you hear what Caleb just said?" Every time you do that, you are punching the billionaires and bankers. You're punching the old order, and you're helping the new order to come into existence. You are a foot soldier in the battle to create a whole new world. You're doing it, and I'm proud of you. And I'm glad you did it. I'm glad we're doing it together. We're going to build the Center for Political Innovation. I see that about Deng Xiaoping. We're going to build the Center for Political Innovation. We're going to build an audience and a mass movement for socialism. We're going to have people boldly coming forward and doing innovative political work. We're doing so much. I'm delighted. I've got a lot more to say about it. Got a lot of super chats to answer. So now is the time, before we get to those super chats, that I'm going to take a drink of orange juice, and you all are going to start giving me your names and locations so I can call you out as I see you. Roll call time. Roll call time. Dylan from Massachusetts. Who else is here? FVK from Memphis, Tennessee. Ken from Connecticut. Max from Boston. David from Italy. Comrade from Pennsylvania. Albany, New York. Lawrence Chu. Bauxite. Southern California. And New Jersey Mama's Basement. Germany, Adam Jensen. Dave from the UK. Jenny from Cincinnati. Milwaukee. JT24 in Mississippi. Winter Prison, Massachusetts. Guy in Florida. Dallas, Texas. Anthony Penn's in Cleveland. Robert in Hawaii. Julian from Texas. Another Mike in Phoenix. Marissa from Buffalo, New York. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York. Dan in Quebec, Canada. Kansas City, West Virginia. Zach from Springfield. Comrade from California. Alice in Virginia. Adam from Reno. Jack Dundee in the United Kingdom. Liam Hicks from Virginia. Brandon from Bunker, Missouri. Gallon from Henderson, North Carolina. RB, greetings from Culver City, Los Angeles. Michigan, if I missed you, just put it in again. Dengist in New Jersey. Proletarian from Sioux Falls. Alex Giovanni in Salem, Oregon. Harry from Madrid. Bing from Taiwan. Great part of China. I'm AWOL, says Kevin. Leipzig in East Germany. Newton Grove, North Carolina. I appreciate your positivity, dude, says Bungie. Shreveport, Los Angeles. Proletarian from Germany. Ron from St. George, Utah. Tim Stacy from Kentucky. Missed him twice. Well, I just saw you now, so glad I can keep putting your name in. I'm not trying to exclude anybody. It goes by fast, and they also don't all show up. I see quote-unquote top chats. I can't change it to show me all the chats. Marxist from Davie, Florida. George from Romania. Thaddeus from Memphis. Thaddeus. Tim from the United Kingdom. Comrade from Philly. San Diego, D-King. Right? Hey, Caleb says, Joe the Red, hopes all is well with me in Brooklyn. Joe's out in Long Island. Shout out to you, Joe. All is good. Nathaniel Adams from Toronto. Sam from Los Angeles. Meryl from California. Kinky, she's out in California. She's with us, right? Who else is here? Copenhagen. Jacob from Copenhagen, right? Mark from Mr. Red Mark from California. Just waiting for it to catch up. Don't want to miss anybody. Great international community, says Harry. Thank you, Harry. Las Vegas, says Alex Gaticia. Hello from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I went there when I was a kid. I went to Kalamazoo. I have been to Kalamazoo. Hello from Sydney, Vallejo, California. In Colorado, says E.E. Camp. Ramiro, good friend of the show, in Los Angeles, Missouri, USA. And Caleb, you always get my name right. Love it too, says Mr. Red. I'm glad. I'm very, very, very glad. Don't want to miss anybody. Lisbon, Portugal. Lisbon, Portugal. Very, very interesting. I need to get to Portugal. Four Oaks, North Carolina. Illinois, Brian Schaefer. That's Donnie Wallace in Four Oaks. Brian Schaefer in Illinois. Charlotte, North Carolina for now, says Lincolnite Yankee. I've been out there to Charlotte, spent a month out there. I might even talk about that later. That'll be interesting. Sydney from Sydney, Australia. Argy Kalos, right? A lot of folks out there in Australia who like what we do here. Charlotte is okay to leave, says Kevin. Well, there you go. There you go. I'll sip some more orange juice. I want to make sure I'm calling out everyone. If I missed your name, just repeat it so it'll come up again. Can't trust those YouTube algorithms, right? Chicago, Illinois, says Miles Kinslow. Very good. Arezzo Papi, Italy. Very good. Mo in Toronto. Nate from Sydney, Australia. Very, very good. Farshid from Bay Area, California. Good to hear you, Farshid. Joy from Portland, Oregon. Do you think the Maduro government will be able to survive? We can talk about that. OJ gang, right? Well, I've had a couple. I must admit, I did have a diet beverage on Friday. I was doing a radio interview. Marxist Davey from Florida here. Very good, very, very good. I will say I had a month with no diet beverage, no Diet Coke. But Friday morning, I had a radio interview. I was on Sputnik Radio with Garland Nixon and Lee Stranahan for May Day at 7:30 a.m. Of course, lockdown, Corona streaming, coronavirus time. I've been sleeping in quite a bit, so 7:30 was really pushing it, and so I had to have a diet. I drank a diet before that interview, and yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. And I had one today as well. So I've had two, right? So I broke my month, but I had a whole month without it, which I'm very proud of myself. I had one on Friday. I had one today. I've only had two since then. But it's certainly nothing like it was. And it's just been one. I mean, I just drank one. So, I mean, usually, you saw me. I used to just go through it, right? I mean, I would just go through it, but just one. Didn't even bother to cut it with ice. Just drank it warm. So there you go. But yes, Kinky says 10 Hail Marys and you're absolved, brother. Well, thank you, Kinky. But yes, folks. So, why don't we get down to these super chats, right? That is my policy. If you give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. Do you have a critique of Antonio Gramsci? Yes, I do, and I'll talk about that. Antonio Gramsci. Alrighty. So the first question was from Mr. Liam Hicks. He is asking about Islam and Marxism. Can one be a Muslim and be a Marxist? Well, that's a complicated question. In the absolute literal sense, in the taking everything Marx said sense, no. Right? Karl Marx was an atheist. He believed in hard materialism. So, Islam is a religion that acknowledges God and is based on submission to God. So obviously one could not be a pure 100% Marxist and be a Muslim. However, I am not a pure 100% Marxist, right? I am a Marxist and a Christian. I believe in a God and a higher power. I'm not a hard materialist, but I believe that Marx was generally right in understanding how society works and how the world works and where the world is going. And I think that there are many things in the Islamic tradition, just like in the Christian tradition, just like in any, spiritual or prophetic tradition, that can lead one, toward the correct conclusion, toward class struggle, toward sacrifice. Um, you can read. I'm most familiar with the Shia tradition and the imams and how they gave their lives. You talk about Hussein, the savior of Islam. You talk about Imam Ali. You talk about that, and these were Muhammad's descendants, and they gave their lives. They were kind of struggling. There was a bit of a class struggle within Islam following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, um, and the merchants and the traders and the emerging capitalist class was fighting against Muhammad's family, and Muhammad's family then positioned themselves as the defenders of the poor. And that's why, Imam Ali, very famously, he said he has never seen great riches piled up one place without the violations of rights piled up all around it. Meaning that he's never seen people that have become wealthy without hurting and violating the rights of people all around them. If you look at the sayings of Imam Ali, who was one of the most important people to the Shia, Muslim tradition, very socialistic, to live for the oppressed, to fight and die for the oppressed. I believe he said, this world is a stinking corpse, and all who live for this world will die with it, right? Meaning that if you are pursuing material things, if your life is about getting rich, if you don't care about other things, if you put spiritual things aside, then you will perish along with this world. You can find a lot of socialistic things in the Shia tradition. But Islam itself, I mean, it stipulates that it is a requirement of Muslims to pay a zakat, which is a percentage of their income that goes to help the poor and help the downtrodden, right? And that there are many things in the Islamic tradition that point toward, wow, another one, third worldism, all right, that point toward, that point toward fighting for liberation. Now, what's interesting is, Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, his government in Libya was called the Islamic Socialist. I don't even know how to pronounce the last word. It means like society or country. And, he was a Sunni Muslim, but he was an Islamic socialist. He believed in a secular government. And he believed in a secular government. He was a Sunni Muslim, but he was not a Wahhabi. He was very anti-Wahhabi. He believed that women should have a role in the government. You can read the Green Book, and I believe it's often called Italian partisans during World War II alleged funding mafia rings in Italian elections. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, and he pushed he pushed Islamic socialism, and you can read the Green Book. There's a lot in the Green Book about that system, and he called it the Third Universal Theory. He called it Kibbism. That was Gaddafi, and he also promoted. There's a form of Islamic mysticism. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is referred to as, but there is Sufism, which is the Islamic mystical tradition of people who fast in order to try and get closer to God, or they dance, or they do things, that rituals that will get them in touch with a higher power. It's called the Sufi tradition. That's a form of Islam, and Gaddafi was very supportive of that, of the Sufi mystical Islamic tradition. Um, However, and that's Gaddafi was a secular Sunni, and the Ba'ath movement, in Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a secular Sunni. He practiced Islam. He prayed in mosques. He studied the Quran, and he was a Sunni. Now, Bashar Assad in Syria, he is an Alawite. And that's it's considered to be a form of Shia Islam, but it's not exactly, right. It's not like the Shia in Iran are 12er Shias. They acknowledge 12 imams that came after Muhammad, whereas the Alawite tradition, right? Those are people that acknowledge Muhammad, and they also acknowledge Imam Ali, right? And they argue that Imam Ali, I believe it's alleged that they believe the angel that visited Muhammad was originally supposed to visit Ali. They keep their secrets, their religion very secretive. They don't pray in mosques. They have prayer rooms in their houses, and they keep their beliefs. It's almost like a secret society. They keep them very, very hush hush. It's not for public consumption. Um, but that's the Alawite tradition, and they're very secular and they're very modern, and they're a religious minority in Syria, and they were given military training by the French during the French colonial occupation, and because they had that military training, they then studied socialism and became the leaders of the revolution against the French colonizers. That's the Alawites, right? Now in Iran, right? In Iran, so in Syria, in Libya, you had Islamic socialism, right? Now in Iraq and Syria, you had Ba'athist Arab socialism, right? Which believed in a secular government. It believed, it was secular. It didn't believe in one religious government, but it also recognized the importance of Islam in the Arab people, and the Arab nation has a unique history, and that Islam is a big part of the spirit of Arabism. The founder of Ba'athist Arab socialism was Michel Aflaq, and Michel Aflaq was a Christian who first became an atheist communist and eventually converted to Sunni Islam because he recognized that to really love the Arab people and to really understand the spirituality of the Arab people, being asked about Houthis. Okay, all right, putting it on the list. In order to recognize the Islam of the spirit of the Arab people, he needed to convert to Sunni Islam, and then now in Iran, right, they're 12 Shia Muslims, right? They recognize 12 imams. And the last imam is called Imam Mahdi. And they believe that at the end of time, the 12th imam will return and he will bring justice to the world. Khomeini, became the leader of the Islamic Revolution. And the slogans of Khomeini, and that's one of the things that people point out in biographies of Khomeini, was that Khomeini was a brilliant sloganeer. He was a good speaker, great writer, but one of the brilliant things is he knew how to just come up with slogans that were everywhere, right? Just slogans that you would see spray painted on walls, you'd hear them, and it would be everywhere, would be these slogans from Imam Khomeini. And one of those slogans was not capitalism, but Islam. Not capitalism, but Islam. Right? And that slogan was the rallying cry of the Islamic Revolution of 1979 in Iran. Not capitalism, but Islam. Another one of the slogans that was key in the Islamic Revolution of Iran was war of poverty against wealth. War of poverty against wealth. Khomeini, he was very powerful, and he moved people, and was quite a movement. And the Islamic Republic is very, very anti-capitalist, right? It controls the economy. Major industries are run by the state. They have these things called basij. It's kind of like how in Cuba they have committees to defend the revolution in every neighborhood. In Venezuela they have Bolivarian circles. Well, in Iran they have basij. And basij means mobilized, oppressed. And I was taken to speak at many basij events. They took me around the country. And, I don't know if people know about the keffiyeh or the chafi, right? That you see the Palestinians wear them. Well, that's the symbol of the basij. And it's the mobilized, oppressed. Every single neighborhood in Iran has a basij council, right? And they're people who, they have regular jobs. They might be teachers, they might be lawyers, they might be doctors, they might be, dentists or farmers or whatever. But they also spend a whole amount of their time as volunteering to promote the Islamic Revolution in their neighborhood, and to make sure that Western propaganda is not on display, to promote anti-imperialist ideas. In Iran, you'll see posters. They have billboards in Iran. They have a billboard that was there when I was there. There was this huge billboard in Iran, and it was Iwo Jima, right? The American flag being raised over Iwo Jima. But instead of having the soil beneath the American flag, it had just a pile of corpses, right? The message being U.S. imperialism, that American flag is built on the corpse of millions of people. And that was a big billboard that was put up by the Basij. The Basij, they have billboards of Malcolm X, with faces of Malcolm X, with quotes from Malcolm X about capitalism and racism. The Basij, they have posters supporting the Palestinian struggle, and that they're kind of the backbone of the anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist edge of the Islamic Revolution. Now they're very anti-communist, right? They don't like Marxism because they say Marxism is not Islamic, right? And it's very complicated. But there are different views within the Islamic Revolution. Some in the Islamic Revolution are very very pro-market and feel, and some argue that there's even forces who refer to themselves as the quote Islamic left, as the red Shia, that are almost Marxists. So it's complicated, right? And Islam, like many religions, there are many interpretations, right? The Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, those are feudalists. They want to go back to the 1400s. They behead people, they torture people, they want to kill all communists. They are for an absolute autocratic monarchy. They're for they're fascists basically. They're fascists. The Wahhabis. Then you have the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, very anti-communist, but their thing is they're for a secular or a modern government, not really a secular government, but a modern government. They believe in capitalism. They think capitalism is great as long as you do charity work, and they do a lot of charity work, and they feed poor people. But they're in favor of elections. They're in favor of computers and technology and things like that. And they hate communists, and they've been in bed with the CIA since the 1950s. The CIA has been funding them and using them to destabilize Egypt, to fight against socialism in Syria and Iraq and other places. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. CIA group. You can talk about Gulen, right? Who is the guy who tried to lead the coup in Turkey. The USA stopped liking Erdogan, and there was a coup attempt. Well, who tried to overthrow, Erdogan in Turkey? It was this guy, this pastor, not a pastor, but an imam or a religious scholar or a leader named Gulen. And Gulen is currently being harbored by the United States. I actually met him. I went to the place he lives in the Poconos, and this facility with armed guards and fences and all of that. And you can see Gulen is being harbored by the U.S. government. He is a cleric, a Muslim Brotherhood cleric, who is being harbored by the U.S. government and protected. He's and the Turkish government wants to extradite him. They want him back to Turkey to stand trial for destabilizing the country in bed with the CIA. But the U.S. government's protecting him. Muslim Brotherhood, that's one current. So you got the Muslim Brotherhood current that's tied in with Turkey, that's tied in with Qatar. You've got the Wahhabis, that's tied in with Saudi Arabia. Could someone repeat that? Best recommendations for an 18-year-old aspiring Marxist journalist. Okay. All right. Yep. All right. Advice. 18-year-old. Right. Yeah. So you got that, but then you have the Shia revolutionary current that is anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist. You have Ba'athist Arab socialism. You have Islamic socialism from Libya. So it's complicated. There are many different interpretations. Many different interpretations. Now, a lot of the mosques in the United States that are Sunni depend on funding from either Saudi Arabia or Turkey. And that influences them. It absolutely influences them. I mean, they depend on that paycheck from Saudi Arabia. They depend on that paycheck from Turkey. And because of that, that influences their politics. And you can't deny that. There's a lot of Saudi money and a lot of Turkish money in Islam in the Western countries. So that influences the politics. And so I spent a lot of time on this, but it's an important question. I believe, yes, one can draw from Karl Marx and be a Muslim. Absolutely. And I think Ba'athist Arab socialism, I think the Islamic Revolution of Iran are a great example of that. Neither of those movements are explicitly Marxist, right? Those are not communist parties. Those are not Marxist-Leninist parties, but they're socialist parties, anti-imperialist parties. They align with communists in various countries around the world, and they're anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, right? So I think that yes, one can be influenced by Marxism and be a practicing Muslim, right? Just like one can be a practicing Christian and be influenced by Marxism, like Hugo Chavez and Maduro, right? Or the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, socialism, Christianity, and solidarity. So I think that this Marxist contempt for religion is outdated. It's rooted in the time of the Enlightenment, when religion was very new, and because when science was very new, when religion had been dominating, under feudalism, religion had been the dominant force, and science was new, and the church was seen as an institution that held back social progress. It was the state. There was no separation of church and state in most European countries. So because of that, coming out of the French Revolution, coming out of, events in Britain and Germany, there was a strong anti-clerical current in the Marxist movement, because the Marxist movement, Hannah Arendt, okay, because the Marxist movement, came out of the revolutionary current that toppled feudalism. Because of that, it contained a very anti-religious edge to it. But I think that things have changed. I think the world has changed. The way religion operates has changed. Things have changed, right? I mean, and that was our revolution here in the United States. The American Revolution had a very anti-religious current to it. Thomas Paine, read his writings. He very anti-Christian, very anti-Bible. Read Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson actually he rewrote the Bible. I bet you didn't know that. But Thomas Jefferson was so much of an atheist that he was worried that people would stop believing in the teachings of Jesus because they were associated with miracles. So he took the New Testament of the Bible and he edited it, and he cut out all the miracles and all the magic and all the angels and all of that stuff, and he published a book. It was called like The Teachings of Jesus, and it was just the words of Jesus, edited by Thomas Jefferson. They call it the Jefferson Bible, right? But that makes sense, right? At that time, the American Revolution was fighting against, the English, the British government that was a religious government. And they were fighting for, freedom of religion, and people had come to the United States for religious freedom. So it makes sense that our revolution in the United States would also have an anti-clerical current, right? I mean, a lot of the quote unquote founding fathers were not Christians. They were either atheists, they were pantheists, we need to put everything in context, right? And that Marxism emerged in Europe in the struggle to bring down feudalism as a new current, that when feudalism had been brought down, said, oh, wow, there's still problems. So maybe we need to think about possibly a new system, right? And the first socialists were religious, right? So Saint Simon is the first socialist, the first person to call himself a socialist. He was a Christian. Robert Owen was spiritual. He was the first person to use the word socialism in English, but he was spiritual. He wasn't a Christian. He was very critical of organized religion, but he believed in spirits and magic and seances and stuff, and Marx comes along and he says, well, I'm a scientific socialist, right? I'm broken with all religion. So that's what you need to understand there. And I think that the repression of religious people, was wrong. Went on in the Soviet Union, went on in China and elsewhere, and it was wrong. And I think that it's been a hurt. It's held back the revolutionary movement. Latin America, they've gotten over that, right? Now the revolutionary movements of Latin America are very religious. They're very Roman Catholic. They're very anti-imperialist. The Middle Eastern world, they've gotten over that. And China, the Communist Party is an atheist party, but Buddhism is flourishing in China right now. Right? They're even funding and building mosques in the Uyghur regions in China right now, right? I bet you wouldn't know that, right? They never talk about that. They have you believe that they're trying to outlaw Islam or something. No, they're trying to suppress terrorism, and they're trying to suppress foreign influence from Wahhabis, from the Muslim Brotherhood and groups like that. But they're promoting Islam, and they're building mosques, building seminaries all over the Islamic regions of China. So it's complicated, and I've spent a lot of time on this. It's a very important question, but now we will move on to the next, because I got plenty of super chats. I'm glad you guys keep it coming. Yeah, the more you super chat, the longer we go, the more I have to say. So we talked about religion and Islam. I hope that answered your question, Liam Hicks. All right, the lumpen proletariat. The lumpen proletariat. Right? So that's a very big point of confusion, because the Black Panther Party had a very unique interpretation of that concept. But basically, so Karl Marx, he talks about two classes. There's the capitalist class, those who own the means of production. They own the banks, they own the factories, they own the big box stores, they own the oil wells, and they own for a living. And they use these things that they own to make profits. And then there's the working class, those of us who sell our labor power to them. But it's not that simple. Within the capitalist class, for example, you have the petty bourgeoisie, right? That's small business owners. Right? If somebody, maybe they own a small apartment building and they rent like 8 apartments. Technically, they're owning for a living, right? They're a capitalist. But are they running the government? No. Are they the 1%? No. Are they the ruling class? No. They're owning for a living. They're not part of the ruling class. They're bourgeois, technically, but they're petty bourgeois. They're not part of the ruling class, right? And within the working class, you have stratification, right? During the early 1900s, there was a huge effort to build up what you can call the aristocracy of labor, which were craftsmen, construction workers, pipe fitters, skilled trades. And those workers made way more money than other workers, and they were more right-wing and more conservative. They were the aristocracy of labor. Well, also within the working class, Marx talked about, you have the lumpen proletariat. And what the lumpen proletariat is people that are part of the working class, but they're never really allowed to be part of the working class, right? Their income comes from criminal activities mostly. They're barely employed. They're barely surviving. They're desperately poor. And they're just completely locked out. The lumpen proletariat. Those are elements that are, Marx even called them declassed elements. Elements that have been, they're from the working class, but capitalism has just stripped them of the ability to be in the working class. They're not working someplace making low wages. They're selling drugs. They're involved with the mafia. They're in prison. They're out of prison, right? They're starving. They're living in the shadows, right? That's the lumpen proletariat, right? That's workers who are the most oppressed. Have you read Guy Standing and his modern class definitions? If you no, I haven't. I haven't, so I can't comment on that. Sorry, but they're the folks that are, Marx talked about the unemployed being the reserve army of labor, but these are folks that are like permanently unemployed. They're permanently unemployed, and when they do survive, it's very, very, very precarious, short term. They're in and out of jail, and so that's the lumpen proletariat. And Marx had a negative view of the lumpen proletariat because he said the lumpen proletariat is so desperately poor, it'll work for whoever hires them, right? If the ruling class needs to break a strike, which they do, right, they'll hire these guys. And this happened. I know Sam Marcy, the Workers' World Party founder, would always say the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club were lumpen proletariat, right? Because whenever, that was true, when there were peace demonstrations, these bikers who sell drugs and, live on their bikes and are kind of poor, but they're biking around or whatever, they would come and attack the peace demonstration. Why? Do you think they're deeply thinking about politics? They've researched the Vietnam War, and they just, after much consideration, we have concluded that we must know. They're hired to do it. They're desperate, right? And that fascism, right? The Nazi party, the brown shirts in Nazi Germany, they would hire desperately poor people, criminal elements and gangs to just kind of attack left-wing people. And when there was a strike, a lot of times lumpen elements became strike breakers. Marx had a very, very low opinion of the lumpen proletariat, right? Because he said, look, they're so desperate. They're not on the job. They're not trying to build a union. They're not fighting for their rights. They're not trying to make peace in their communities. These are people that are declassed, he called it. They're locked out of the system. And their revolutionary potential isn't there. Now, the Black Panthers, they took Marx's understanding of the lumpen proletariat and they argued that it applied to the entire black community, right? And that's not the case. The overwhelming majority of African Americans in the United States are workers. They go to work, they sell their labor power, their wages are significantly lower than other workers due to discrimination and the history of oppression and such. They're the last hired and the first fired. They're oppressed, absolutely, but they're workers. Right? And this media stereotype that all black people are criminals or all black people are in jail, that's a racist stereotype. That's not true, right? African Americans in the United States are workers, right? Now, are there lumpen elements among the African American community? Sure. There's plenty of lumpen elements among the white community as well. The prisons are full of poor white people. I'll never forget. I went to a demonstration near Rikers Island one day. And it was, black and white marching against the prison industrial complex. I was doing a news story on it. And two desperately poor people were walking out of the area, out of they were walking. They had been at Rikers. There's like ocean. Like they were walking. They'd been there to visit somebody. Two very, very poor people. I mean, you could tell, rotten teeth and ripped clothes and just two very, very poor people started shouting like racial slurs at the demonstration. Those folks were lumpen, right? And they were visiting somebody on the inside who was, and you saw those folks, and it broke my heart to hear them hurling racial slurs at this protest that was black and white. But it's, I mean, there's plenty of white people that are lumpen also, right? But when you're lumpen, when you're that desperate to survive, when you're addicted to drugs, when you're involved in criminal organizations, at that point, your ability to be a revolutionary is limited. And I think that was Marx's point. Huey Newton and the Black Panther Party, they argued that Marx was wrong about that, and they argued that the oppressed nationalities in the United States were the lumpen proletariat. That was their argument. And what's interesting is Franz Fanon and a lot of the new left thinkers of the 60s, they drew from George Sorel, and they argued that instead of trying to build a mass party that was in communities and in neighborhoods, you should try to build some kind of fighting force, some kind of armed group that acts heroic and engages in violence, propaganda of the deed. And they argued that lumpen elements are useful in doing that, right? And Sorel and fascists and some of the ultra-left elements, they have this kind of idea that because lumpen elements, because people that are criminal, because people that have been involved in drugs and all of that because they're desperately poor, they're going to be more heroic, they're going to do violent stuff and all of that. That's an ultra-left deviation, right? I mean, are there people who are lumpen that can do good things? Of course. A lot of the Occupy people, a lot of the white people at Occupy Wall Street, a lot of the young white people at Occupy, if you got to know them, they were lumpen, right? There's a lot of young people who ride the railroads. I don't know. I used to work in Cleveland at a gas station, and near the gas station, and it was in an African-American neighborhood, but near the gas station was railroad tracks. And I remember I would see these young white people who would just be walking around covered in mud. And I always wonder, who the hell are they? And people said, those are railroad kids. There's a lot of young white kids who run away from home, and maybe they're from a middle-class home, but they run away from home and they ride the railroads and they use drugs and they shoplift in order to get by. And, they're, I mean, they have made themselves lumpen. They have declassed themselves. They might be from a working class household or maybe even a middle class petty bourgeois household, but because of whatever reason, they're rebelling, they become lumpen. They declass themselves. And a lot of the Occupy Wall Street kids, you talk to them, they were addicted to some kind of drug. They rode railroads around, and they were just kind of these lumpen elements who'd gotten assembled at Occupy Wall Street. And they were useful to the organizers of Occupy Wall Street because they were a crowd, right? You could have a crowd there. But at the end of the day, could they build a sustainable movement that was in neighborhoods and in communities? Could they articulate politics in a way? Were they going to put them? No, of course not. They're lumpen, right? And that's the thing, is lumpen elements, they can be useful in some cases, but they're not the broad masses of people. The overwhelming majority of people in the United States are not lumpen, right? And the lumpen proletariat, the actual lumpen proletariat, not what Huey Newton argued about the lumpen proletariat, not what Franz Fanon and the Black Panthers argued was the lumpen proletariat, but the actually lumpen proletariat, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, the Crips and the Bloods, there's some gangs in Indiana, there's some white supremacist drug dealing heroin gangs that are like the Aryan Nations or the Aryan Brotherhood, like those guys. That element, there's nothing revolutionary about those folks, right? They're struggling to survive. They're addicted to drugs. They're selling drugs. They're fighting other gangs. They're going to prison. They're out of prison. They're getting in shootouts with other gangs. They're not going to make a revolution. And that there is this kind of, among the middle class left, there's this desire to romanticize those people, to make those people into, well, these are Robin Hoods, and those are badasses, and they're like, again, do we see occasionally lumpen elements doing good things? Yes, right? During Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, we saw when people were hungry and starving, and the government had kind of left all these people in the city to suffer, right? We saw the Crips and the Bloods actually start taking care of people. I bet people didn't know that, right? But they're an organization that existed. And so these criminal organizations actually started helping people get food, and we saw there were elements. So this can happen. When society breaks down, you can have elements that are like lumpen criminal elements that will actually do good things. And that happens because they're there, right? Because they're there. They're the institution. Just like, you'll see the church, lead uprisings and protests, right? I mean, the church was a major center of organizing against slavery during the time of slavery. It was a major center of the civil rights movement. It was an institution that was there. And a lot of times, institutions that are there end up playing a progressive role. So there are times where you can see the lumpen organizations and stuff step up and do good things. But ultimately, the goal of communists, the goal of serious organizers, is to get to the broad masses of people who are not lumpen, right? And that's the issue there. And you know, this idea that all black Americans are lumpen, not true. This idea that all Chicano Americans are lumpen, not true. I wouldn't even say that all undocumented workers in the United States are lumpen. There's a lot of undocumented folks who have a job. They go to their job. They pay their bills just like anybody else. You know, and so even the majority of the undocumented community in the United States, I wouldn't even say is lumpen, right? Lumpen elements, you know, they can't really be the basis for a revolution. I hope that answers the question. That may not be the answer that folks wanted to hear, and it's certainly the 60s left has a very different understanding of that. I'm giving you the classical Marxist understanding of the lumpen proletariat. All right. I'm giving you long answers to your questions. Caleb's beard is lumpen. Well, there you go, right? Okay, so someone's asking me, have you seen, this is Kinky is asking me, have you seen Planet of the Humans? I have not. I saw Michael Moore and the film's director on The Hill. I watched the interview. I'm gonna push this down here a little bit. On The Hill, their crystal ball interview, and then I saw Josh Fox's response. I saw the two interviews. Josh Fox is bashing the film, says the film is unbelievable, horrible. Michael Moore is the film's producer. The film's director is defending the film from the controversy. And I don't want to see the film. I like Michael Moore. I like Michael Moore a lot. Capitalism, a Love Story, like one of my old, somebody that I lived with for a long time is actually in the movie. You know, I mean, there's people that I knew that are in the movie as well. And, you know, I mean, and Sicko gives me chills every time I watch it. Bowling for Columbine, I loved that movie. That was one of my favorite movies in high school. I like Michael Moore's stuff, but this movie, you know, so it seems like the debate is that in the movie, Michael Moore, and it's not even Michael Moore, right? It's the director of the movie. He's the producer. But the movie goes after green technology, right? It goes after solar panels. It goes after wind turbines. And it shows that there's a lot of corporations, capitalist corporations, that make a lot of money off of the environmental movement. And that in a lot of cases, these ecological, this green technology stuff isn't as really good for the environment as it markets itself to be. Surprise, surprise. Shock, right? You know, and that it exposes kind of the green industry and how there has been kind of a corporatization of environmentalism. Okay. However, it then argues that the real thing is overpopulation. The big problem is it's a Malthusian film. And you know, they pressed him on that. Crystal Ball and The Hill, they pressed him on that. He insisted, "Oh, no. I'm not saying we need to reduce the human population." Yes, you are. Yeah, you are. If you're saying overpopulation is the issue, you are saying that. And we need to use less resources. So and then Josh Fox, you know, he called them out on that, but it seems like the divide is, are you just a hardcore Malthusian, or do you think there are things we can do now? But when Michael Moore said that the problem is the belief in growth, my head wanted to explode. That's the Club of Rome. That's Malthusianism. That is anti-historical progress. He said the problem is under capitalism, people believe in growth. Well, socialism believes in growth too. The problem isn't growth. The problem is irrational growth. Under capitalism, we grow in a deeply irrational way, and it leads to the boom-bust cycle. Right? And we don't think ahead. We talk about short term. Every capitalist is doing their own thing, trying to make as much money, trying to skirt regulations, competing with other capitalists, trying to make profits. Socialism gives us the ability to work with our resources in a rational way, to plan out how we're going to work with our resources, number one, so we can use them in a long-term and sustainable way. And at number two, it stops the holding back of advancement. Why do you think that alternative energy has become solar panels and windmills? Why? Why do you think that? Because those things are never going to overtake the fossil fuel industry. They're not higher. They're not a higher energy source, right? Nuclear fusion, it's been killed. I mean, I interviewed his name is Eric Lerner, Dr. Eric Lerner. He is the top fusion researcher in the country, right? Dr. Eric Lerner, a physicist, and he has a great facility in New Jersey. I went out there. I did a story on it for Press TV. His funding was cut. They have cut his funding. He gets a little bit of government funding. They've cut it. He has to raise money from around the world, right? And Iran, the government of Iran, has done all kinds of fusion research, and so they passed a law that the fusion research lab in New Jersey and the fusion research lab in Iran couldn't share data. And so they had to take it to court, and court rulings, it was overturned. But, fusion energy, right? There is all kinds of efforts to stop fusion energy, right? They don't want fusion. Why? Because it'll put fossil fuels out of business. It's higher than fossil fuels. Solar panels are not a threat to fossil fuels. Wind turbines are not a threat to fossil fuels. But nuclear fusion is. Fusion energy absolutely is. That's why in the 1980s, it was Wall Street that built this anti-nuclear committee. And they worked really, really hard to stop the nuclear power from developing. And a lot of leftists went along with it because they knew that nuclear power was tied in with nuclear weapons. And it always has been. And in fact, the way nuclear power is conducted in the United States is very inefficient. It comes from nuclear submarines. In the way we even do nuclear power, there's much better and safer ways of doing nuclear power we never explored because of the military-industrial complex. The way we have nuclear power here, it's tied in with military. It's just completely tied in with the military-industrial complex. And we make nukes and we have power plants that help us make nukes. And even the nuclear power plants that we have are not very efficient. But Wall Street wanted to just kill all nuclear power. It's a mess. But China is working on fusion like day and night, and they are doing amazing breakthroughs. And that's part of the reason they did that moon mission, right? That mission to the moon. It was to get helium-3, which is an element that's very rare on Earth, but it's in huge abundance on the far side of the moon, right? And they got that helium-3, and if China can if they can make a breakthrough. Look, if China can make breakthrough in fusion energy, and they're funding research like crazy right now, if they can make a breakthrough in fusion energy, we're going to live in a whole new world, I'm telling you, right? Fusion energy will put the fossil fuel industry out of business, and it's a different world. It's a different world. So yeah, I haven't seen Planet of the Humans. I don't think I want to because I work very, very hard to be optimistic and not be pessimistic, and the message of the film is problematic in my view. And but I'm not totally with Josh Fox either, because Josh Fox is saying, oh, we need to believe in the green energy stuff, the windmills and the solar panels. So Ataturk. Okay, we'll talk about Ataturk. Writing it down. I'm just cranking them out. I know it takes me a while, so I just I'm going to go through these as we've got them. How do we relate to these anti-lockdown protesters? Good night. I don't know. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their housing. They have very, very big concerns. A lot of people are suffering because of this lockdown. They're worried. They're afraid. They're scared, and the fears have been tapped into by the small business owners, by the wing of the ruling class that's being pummeled. Right? Great example of this. Walmart is open all over the country during the lockdown. So, do you see them? They don't support the lockdown protests, but Home Depot is closed in most parts of the country. Why? Why is Home Depot closed? Well, Home Depot is not considered essential in many parts of the country. Walmart is. Walmart and Home Depot sell about the same kind of stuff. However, you can get much better versions of it at Home Depot. Home Depot is owned by Bernie Marcus, who's a Trump supporter. So it's closed down, right? And it's not considered essential. So he's suffering. Walmart is making a killing right now because people who would buy things at other businesses can't buy them because they're not open. Walmart's doing great with this lockdown. They want this lockdown to go on as long as it possibly can. Bernie Marcus of Home Depot wants this lockdown to immediately end so he doesn't go out of business, right? Great example. Fracking companies. At this point, the oil price is the lowest ever, right? Fracking companies want this lockdown to end so they don't go out of business. The super majors want this lockdown to go on as long as it can so the frackers and the drillers go out of business and they can maintain their monopoly, right? There's a division in the ruling class right now. That's what's behind the lockdown and anti-lockdown protests. Amazon stock, Jeff Bezos' stock is at $1.1 trillion. The richest people in the world, have made billions off of this lockdown because they have the monopolies. Whereas their competitors, that layer that supports, Trump, they have been pummeled. They have been demolished by this. And that, restaurant owners, restaurant chains are suffering. You go down the line, right? That there's a division in the ruling class right now. There's a big division in the ruling class about this lockdown. One section wants it to end immediately, and they don't care if grandma dies. They don't care if elderly people don't live. They have what's his name? They got Glenn Beck, and they got Lieutenant Governor of Texas all saying, "Oh, just let people die. We got to end it." That's one section of the ruling class. You got another section of the ruling class that's saying, let's keep this going for a while. Let's make sure we get everything done while we're doing it. And both of them are wrong. We should do what's in the interest of society. But that's not how capitalism works, right? That's not how capitalism works, unfortunately. It's not how capitalism works. There's interest groups. They push their interest. There's another interest group. They push their things. There's division in the ruling class. Same as the nuclear power stuff I was talking about before. Military-industrial complex wants it. The oil companies didn't want it. Big oil, CIA didn't want it. Military-industrial complex wanted it. It's the same kind of thing. And these anti-lockdown protests, I must say, and I was going to talk about this later, but I might as well talk about this now. On Saturday, the NYPD started doing social distancing arrests, where they would basically just arrest people for violating social distancing. And there's some videos that's come out of some very brutal arrests, knees on the necks of people. Okay. Christianity and capitalism. All right, I'll talk about it. Okay. Brutal arrests. And, the NYPD just being vicious to people, and you can look at the video. I tweeted it out. But, I didn't see any vicious arrests. I mean, these people in Michigan stormed into the state capitol. They stormed into the state capitol with guns. No, I didn't see the police throwing them to the ground and, putting knees on their necks, but of course not, because they're being, they're supporting big business. They're supporting business owners who want this open. They're supporting Bernie Marcus. They're supporting the fracking companies, right? PragerU is paid for by fracking companies. The DeVos Foundation that funds, Turning Points USA. Bernie Marcus and Home Depot, right? These are hired foot soldiers of the ruling class. That it's in the interest of their paid, people, their paid protesters. This is a paid movement. This is Tea Party Express. This is AstroTurf. Not that there's not AstroTurf on the left, there is, but this is, that's what this is. And they're doing a job, right? And they're threatening the governor of Michigan. They're threatening Dr. Fauci, hoping that he will do things that are more in favor. This is a division in the ruling class, and these people are scared. And I would say to these people, and again, they wouldn't listen to me. I would say to them, wouldn't it be more important that instead of opening things up and letting people die, that the government makes sure that we have what we need and that people don't, take care of people who've lost their jobs, make sure nobody gets evicted from their homes. And they would say, I don't want the government to take care of me. I want the free market. Okay, I got it. But right now we have a public health. We have to be in this together. So shouldn't we be demanding that the government put us first, right? And not bail out the rich, right? Maybe instead of bailing out big corporations, we should demand that we get taken care of, right? And demand that the people become the priority. Demand something like a universal basic income. Demand that no layoffs be done. Think of solutions, an end to evictions, a moratorium on evictions, a moratorium on home foreclosures. Maybe instead of demanding that things open up, we demand that there be protection for the people until we can open up. Right? And they would just say, I don't want the government to take care of me. I'm on my own. I'm an individual. My house is... Okay. How do you argue with that? Are you familiar with Eleanor Burke Leacock? She has her own edition of The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State, and she was an anthropologist. Well, that was a very nice super chat, and I will give you... I'm not familiar with her, but I can talk about Origin of the Family. Origin of the Family. This is going to be a long live. Of the Family. Engels. I can definitely talk about that because I have read that book, and we will talk about that. Okay. All right, so we talked about the anti-lockdown protests. Was Deng Xiaoping a capitalist roader? Okay, well, the term capitalist roader, that comes out of the Cultural Revolution in China. Thoughts on Warren Buffett dumping all sirloins? I don't know what a sirloin is. Can someone tell me what a sirloin is? Writing it down. What's a sirloin? Airline. Okay. Warren Buffett. All right. Warren Buffett Airlines. Okay. Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. Okay. A lot to get through here. So, Deng Xiaoping, it's okay, Kinky. I just didn't know what you meant. But Deng Xiaoping, capitalist rotor. Was Deng Xiaoping a capitalist rotor? Um, Here's the thing. So during the Cultural Revolution, there was a divide in the Chinese Communist Party, right? Mao's faction, he mobilized the young people. It was mainly Lin Biao and eventually the Gang of Four, mobilized young people to, they called it bombard the headquarters and drive out the quote unquote capitalist rotors in the government. It was not a good thing. The Cultural Revolution was not good. And, the idea was they were going to make China as purely communist as possible. And it caused a lot of problems in the economy. And it created a lot of problems. And you may not be aware, and people aren't aware. I mean, there's all this literature kind of glorifying China during the Cultural Revolution, right? And I read a lot of that, right? And it's the other side of the story. I mean, with socialist countries, there's always another side of the story. I'm going to sit up more here. Ugh. There's always another side of the story. And so, you want to give people the time of day. But what people don't realize, is that okay? So the Cultural Revolution, you initially had what was called, it was on the universities. You had, the students protesting. They were putting up big character posters. They were called. They were posters that they were putting up denouncing things in the university for not being in line with communism, not being revolutionary, arguing that the teachers in the universities were using kind of authoritarian methods and were teaching the same concepts as the old system. You had plays that were being performed that were like subtle attacks on Mao and had anti-communist messages in them. And so you had this kind of, these students were protesting. So then Mao shows up to support the students. He puts up a poster himself that says it is right to rebel against reactionaries. He's supporting the students in their protests. So, of course, then with the leader of the country telling students to go out and protest, and students all over the country are protesting, and they're putting up big character posters across the country, and their, stores and neighborhoods, if they have, something like Emperor or Heavenly or something like that, they'll tear it down and they'll replace it with something that sounds communist, like revolutionary or working class or something like that. And it was this idea we're gonna purge all the old ideas in China and we're gonna make everything communist. And they tore down a lot of ancient ruins. There were old temples, ancient temples that were like symbols of ancient religion in China. They burned them down, they tore them apart and destroyed them because it's not communist, it's not revolutionary. And it was like a mobilization to try and make China pure communist, right? They said the Soviet Union was selling out communism. We're going to be the pure communism. And then you had the January Storm, which was in Shanghai. You had the young cultural revolutionaries. They overthrew the government. They overthrew the Communist Party, and they created a commune state. They created this commune state, it was called. And they basically declared independence from the Chinese government. They announced they have this autonomous, like worker cooperative government in Shanghai. And at that point, Mao Zedong said, actually, this isn't good, right? This is creating chaos. This is not good. It was Lin Biao and the Gang of Four supported it, and Mao stepped in and said, stop it, right? He said, instead of having just direct, commune states and all of that, with every factory being autonomous, what we're going to do is we're going to have what's called the 3-in-1 combination, where every factory will be headed by a committee of 3 people. The first will be someone who's elected by the workers, right? The second will be a member of the Communist Party, and the third will be a technician, like an engineer or a scientist, right? And those 3 people, they will run the factory. We're not going to do this direct worker, democratic, every factory autonomous thing, right? We'll have the 3-in-1 committee that will run every factory, and that was their solution. So they stopped the commune state thing. Then Lin Biao and Mao had a falling out. And we don't know what that was about, but Lin Biao, supposedly, we don't even know. We don't even know the details. But Lin Biao, he apparently tried to kill Mao, or he tried to have a coup against Mao, and ended up on a plane trying to flee to the Soviet Union. The plane crashed. So Lin Biao was down. But then the Gang of Four, that was Mao's wife and a leader of the Shanghai Commune, and some other 2 other people, the Gang of Four, they were called. They led they were called the Gang of Four, and they started continuing the Cultural Revolution, but it was more from above. It wasn't like a mobilization of the public, and all the young people were sent to the countryside because the idea was if you were in an urban area, right, you had privilege. right? If you lived in a city, you had privilege, right? And at the time, the overwhelming majority of China didn't have running water or electricity. Cities did, so the idea was all the young people, that were communists or whatever, all the young people would be sent to the countryside to work on a farm so that they knew what it was like to be, to be a student or to be a rural person, right? And it's interesting because a lot of the leaders of modern day China, President Xi Jinping was sent to the countryside, right? A lot of, Deng Xiaoping was also sent to the countryside. A lot of the leaders of modern day China are people that when they were 14 or 15, the government deported them to the countryside, took them away from their parents and sent them to a village somewhere that didn't have running water and electricity. And I've known Chinese people who have told me that that was a miserable time, right? I mean, can you imagine having running water and electricity and the government sends you to, be in a rural area and, all of a sudden you're in an area with no running water and electricity. But to be fair, the overwhelming majority of people in China were already in that situation, right? And they didn't have any choice in the matter. I mean, these students didn't have any choice either, but they were already there. So it was complicated. And in fact, I actually had a professor in college, UBI. All right, writing it down, UBI. All right, I had a professor in college, and she was Chinese, and she had been sent to the countryside. And when she was 14, they deported her to the countryside during the Cultural Revolution. And she talked about how it was in the countryside that she learned she wanted to be a college professor, because when the young people were sent to the countryside, they would live in kind of these, barracks together, and they would have political education at night. And during their campaign, criticize Lin Biao, criticize Confucius, all the young people would take turns getting up and denouncing Confucius, who was like the founder of Chinese civilization, right? But he wasn't communist. The Communist Party thought he wasn't communist enough. So she really enjoyed giving a presentation to her young comrades, explaining Confucius's ideas, why they were wrong and not communist. And that was the first time that she, as a young woman, got the idea she might want to be a professor. So it was complicated, but it was a bad time. People remember the Cultural Revolution as being a bad time. And the main group that suffered during the Cultural Revolution were intellectuals, people that had college education, right? People that were scientists, people that were doctors, people that were educated, people with degrees in literature and art, right? There were times where if you played the violin, that was a Western instrument, and you played the violin. And so you might have to, stand on the street corner. I play a Western instrument, shame on me. A mob of young Red Guards might come to your house and smash your violin in front of you and make you stand there with a sign. They would humiliate Buddhist priests, for example, right? They thought Buddhism was anti-communist. So if you were a Buddhist priest, you would be dragged, a mob would drag you around with a sign around your neck that said, Buddhism is dog farts. That's not cool. Right, and that there was this atmosphere where they kind of used mob rule and terror to force people, to be purely communist, and it was problematic, and it was the high achieving people, you know what I mean? It was people that were educated, scientists, engineers, people like that were suffering the most, and the Gang of Four broke with Marxism, right? People say, well, it was an attempt to make it purely communist. No, the Gang of Four declared that you can transition to communism in poverty. They actually argued this. They said transition to a higher stage in poverty. It was a slogan. Transition to a higher stage in poverty, meaning it doesn't matter if China stays poor. Sure, most of the country doesn't have running water and electricity, but as long as we're doing things in a fair, egalitarian way, we can get to communism. And that's what the right wing, they taunt communists for. You just want everyone to be equally poor. No, we don't. That's not what Marx believed at all. Marxism is founded on historical progress. The only way communism is possible is if there is vast material abundance. And the problem with capitalism is it holds back economic development. The growth of capitalism is irrational. That's the issue. So after Mao's death, or no, I think it was shortly before Mao's death, Zhou Enlai died. And Zhou Enlai was the foreign minister of China, and he was somebody who had protected the intellectuals. He would protect the intellectuals. Occasionally, there was a group of young scientists, and they saw that the United States had color televisions, right? And you have to remember, there was an embargo. All the socialist countries of Eastern Europe, you couldn't sell them any American technology, but China could. And so these students had this brilliant idea. Why don't we start making color televisions in China to sell to the Eastern European socialist countries? Great idea, right? They can't buy them from America. They can buy them from China. And the Gang of Four went after these students because they said color televisions are Western capitalist decadence, and they destroyed these students. But then Zhou Enlai, the foreign minister, he stepped in and protected the students. So Zhou Enlai, who had this history of kind of protecting the intellectuals, protecting the educated people in China from the mobs of the Gang of Four, he died. And so when he died, all of these scientists, engineers, teachers, doctors, professors, educated people, came out to his funeral because they said, this is the guy who's protected us from this crazy mob rule stuff the Cultural Revolution is doing. And he's our guy, and he died. And the funeral for Zhou Enlai turned into an anti-communist riot. These young intellectuals and students and scientists went out and they burned red flags, they ripped up Mao's Red Book, they tore down government buildings, they tore down statues of Mao. It was an anti-communist riot. And it was the same thing. It was the same group of people that eventually overthrew socialism in Eastern Europe, right? It was the same group of people. The color revolutions in Czechoslovakia and Romania and Eastern Europe and all these places, it was that same group of people that feel like the socialist system is holding them back. They feel like, I'm full of potential. I can go invent something. I can go do something, but because of the socialist system, I'm screwed. I'm stuck. And so these young people that were mourning Zhou Enlai became anti-communist counter-revolutionaries. Shortly after that, Mao died. Right? And so then a guy who was an ally of the Gang of Four, Hao Guofang, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, he took power. But then Deng Xiaoping took power. The military brought Deng Xiaoping to power. And Deng Xiaoping announced, he said this cultural revolution is over. We believe in socialism, but we believe in economic growth. You can't have socialism without growth. And he goes around and he's giving a speaking tour and he says, poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious, meaning that you cannot transition to communism in poverty, that the goal of a stateless, classless world with vast material abundance, where everyone has what they need, people can take what they need, and each according to his own ability, each according to his needs, that ultimate goal of communism is only possible if we raise people out of poverty, we eliminate poverty, and that we're going to have socialism. But we're going to use market mechanisms. We're going to have free market zones, and we're going to do it so that we can raise people out of poverty and move China towards socialism. We're going to control the economy. We're going to have economic central planning. We're going to have 5-year plans. We're going to have state control of banking and industries. But we're going to do it to raise productive forces. It's not going to be free market capitalism, and it's not going to be a welfare state either, right? You can read Deng Xiaoping's writings. He explains it in very Marxist terminology. He says we have to do this. And in doing that, this was like a brilliant chess move, right? I mean, I hate to compare world politics to a board game, but what Brzezinski and the CIA were doing all across Eastern Europe was going to those intellectuals and those scientists and all those people and saying, oh, communism is holding you back, blah, 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 manipulating them, giving them some weird synthetic left, and, right, whispering in their ears and trying to overthrow socialism. Deng Xiaoping changed socialism in a way that those people could like it, right? He raised the pay of scientists, of teachers, of doctors, of professors and lawyers. And he made them feel like they had a place in the socialist society. They opened computer companies. They designed new housing developments. They invented things. They started phone companies, Huawei Technologies. Look at what it's become, right? And that group of people that was the base of counter-revolution in China are now, at this point, the biggest supporters of communism in China, right? You won't find any bigger supporters of communism in China than the people who work at Huawei Technologies. Why? Because the government, the state-planned economy, has enabled them to make huge technological breakthroughs and make huge inventions. So the people that were the counter-revolution, that were the anti-communists, are now big supporters, right? That's what Deng Xiaoping was able to do. Deng Xiaoping was able to solve a political crisis. A counter-revolution was brewing in China. The intellectuals, the college professors, the educated people were becoming a base of counter-revolution. So Deng had the brilliance of maneuvering them, right? He turned it around. And now it's those intellectuals that are the supporters of the revolution. And China has enabled a whole lot of people to start their own companies, to invent things, but the state controls the means of production. It's still a planned economy. It was necessary. If Deng had not done what he did, socialism would have been overthrown in China. There is no question about it. There's no question about it. Folks, it's weird, but society, that middle class strata has a lot more influence than you would think. There's always people at the top of society, the people that run the government, the people that are richest of the rich or whatever, they always like any society because they're the rulers. And the working class, a lot of the working class are not political, they're just trying to survive. But there's that layer of people, college professors, lawyers, doctors, teachers, people like that. Those people, if a society is strong, those people are supporters of it. And if a society is falling apart, like ours is right now, those people are the biggest critics of it. That layer, that's how a society wins, is the intellectuals, that strata, right? And they're workers. I mean, teachers are workers, college professors are workers, they're workers, engineers are workers, they get paid a wage, they sell their labor power. But that intellectual layer, that layer of people that are creative, when those people agree with the government and agree with the society, that society is going strong. When those people turn against a society, it falls, right? Indigenous communism, Stalin, great warrior. Okay. All right. Indigenous communism. It's going to be a long one tonight. People just keep coming with them. But hey, I'll take it. I've got nowhere to go. We're sitting here Corona streaming. It's great. Okay. And Deng Xiaoping's foreign policy, he was aligned with the United States, trying to get U.S. investment. I'm not going to endorse his foreign policy, but I'm telling you, you have to not view these things in terms of, was this morally right or morally wrong? That's like the Cultural Revolution mindset. As long as we're morally pure, it doesn't matter if it works or not. That's not, right? Deng Xiaoping, you have to understand why Deng Xiaoping happened. Why did Deng Xiaoping enact the market reforms? To prevent a counter-revolution and to start raising people out of poverty. It was the way that China could, advance economically. Why did Deng Xiaoping continue? It was Mao. It was the Gang of Four and Mao who started aligning with the United States, the three worlds theory, right? China was aligned with the United States first in Angola, later in Chile, later in Iran, in Ethiopia. All over the world, you saw the United States and China working against socialism and working against the Soviet Union. China justified it in the name of being super revolutionary. They were working with the CIA around the world. That started with the Gang of Four. But why did, Kampuchea War, the invasion of Vietnam is the most blatant example of it. But why did that happen? Because China had been cut off by the Soviet Union and they wanted to get support from the United States. They needed somebody to invest in them. The Soviet Union had cut them off, so they got support from the United States. And they had these counter-revolutionary foreign policies that were deeply problematic. I don't endorse that, but I'm telling you why they did it, right? And they started with that counter-revolutionary foreign policy and the Mao era under the Gang of Four. Deng Xiaoping continued it, and in the 1990s, it changed. In the 1990s, you started to see that changing, right? So that's about Deng Xiaoping. I mean, was he a capitalist roader? No, he's actually, capitalist roader would be leading China back to capitalism. Deng Xiaoping made the Chinese Communist Party 1,000 times stronger. He strengthened socialism in China so that it could withstand the events of 1989. There was no color revolution. All the Eastern Bloc, all the communist parties were being overthrown. All the young intellectuals were out in the streets denouncing it. Chaos ensued. Those countries' socialism collapsed, and those countries got looted economically, devastated. Romania has never recovered. Czechoslovakia has never recovered. Poland has recovered a little bit, but so many Eastern European countries have been devastated, just devastated, by the return of capitalism. But China, they were able to pursue a market socialist path, and they've raised out of poverty. The Communist Party is stronger than ever. Socialism is in bloom. There's problems. There's corruption, but that's not, he strengthened communism in China, right? China would have gone the way of Eastern Europe if they hadn't done that. So he was not a capitalist roader. He was somebody who used market mechanisms and saved the Chinese Revolution. Okay, next question. Antonio Gramsci. Well, it's interesting. I went to college. I didn't learn much there. It was kind of a waste of time. Okay, North Korea, South Korea. Korea, gunfire. All right, writing it down. All right, Antonio Gramsci, right? Now, I went to college, and what's amusing is Gramsci will be quoted all the time. I took, history classes. Gramsci would be quoted by my professors. I took, political science classes. Gramsci would be quoted. I took sociology, anthropology. Gramsci would be quoted. Gramsci is one of the most loved Marxist scholars. Who was Gramsci? He was a leader of the Italian Communist Party, right? And it's funny, you tell that to people. You tell people that Gramsci guy, he was a communist. No, he couldn't have been. He's a smart guy. My professor talked about him. He couldn't be a communist. That's like what Vosh would say. He couldn't have been a tanky. Oh, he's a good person, But anyway, I know you all love that. I mean, we're going to get to Vosh later. I got plenty to say about that. But, it's like that kind of attitude, right? Oh, he's a good guy. So he couldn't have been a Stalinist. He couldn't have been a hardliner. But yes, Gramsci was a leader of the Italian Communist Party. He was put in prison. By Mussolini. And from prison, he wrote books about Marxist theory. But in prison, just like in the United States, you have these people that censor your mail, right? They go through your mail, and if you've said something that you're not allowed to say, they cross it out. So he had to write about Marxism from prison in coded language. Right? He couldn't write, Marxism teaches. Marxism wasn't allowed. It was fascism. So Gramsci referred to Marxism as the theory of praxis. Praxis. Right? So the theory of praxis teaches blah, 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 blah. He doesn't say Marxism. Doesn't. And he writes about Marxism in code. It's coded Marxism. And he's arguing that intellectuals and art and culture have a role to play. And that was true. At the time, a lot of artists and musicians and scientists but especially a lot of painters and a lot of movie makers and writers and poets and people like that were in the communist parties of Europe. And he was arguing that you could wage a culture struggle against capitalism by kind of infiltrating these cultural spaces. And it's a good writing. I recommend. I think Antonio Gramsci's his prison notebooks are worth reading. I think it's very important. What I find amusing is that a lot of the people who quote him have no idea who he was. He was in the bona fide, tanky Italian Communist Party, the Stalinist, party. Now, he apparently had some criticism of the Soviet Union, and those ideas, escaped from, he had some criticism. He also was very critical of what you can call economic determinism. He's an important thinker. However, the synthetic left has kind of used him. And he's been picked up by them. The Frankfurt School, which was very closely funded. That's Adorno, CIA funded, right? Partisan Review, Der Monat in Germany. It was the Frankfurt School, the cultural current, that's called cultural Marxism, the authoritarian personality and all of that stuff. They picked him up and used a lot of what he wrote about infiltrating cultural spaces. They used that to push their anti-communist synthetic leftism, right? That's not what Gramsci meant for it. That's not, Gramsci was a communist. Now, he apparently had some criticism of Stalin, right? That he wrote letters to somebody criticizing Stalin or something. And he was critical of economic determinism, but at the same point, he was a communist. He was a loyal communist. He died a loyal communist. That's Antonio Gramsci. But because his work is written in code, a lot of academics and academia in the United States, like the most conservative academic will quote Gramsci because they don't even know he was a communist because he wrote in code. It's ridiculous. Number one, and number two, the Frankfurt School and that Marxist current that's anti-Soviet and talks about the authoritarian personality and freedom and all that crap. That grouping has used Gramsci in their they highlight him, because he wrote in code, because no one's gonna support the Soviet Union because they read his books. They have highlighted him. So it's complicated. But overall, I have a very positive view of Gramsci. People should read his work. I'm in favor of Gramsci. I just think some not so good people have distorted his work and used it for their own agenda, and that people like him for the wrong reasons. They like it because it's written in code. I've repeated myself, so there we go. Next question. Third worldism. What is third worldism? Third worldism is the idea, I've done many videos about this, it's the idea that the working class of Western countries are bought off, that they are labor aristocrats, and therefore, there's no point in trying to organize them, right? That the wealth of people in Western countries comes from the third world, and so therefore, there's no point. And the socialist revolutions in the West are, I guess, highly unlikely. Someone corrected me when I said that they could never happen. They said, oh, no, we think it could happen. Well, okay, they're highly unlikely, and that we shouldn't be trying to organize the broad masses of American workers because there's no point because they're all bought off labor aristocrats. That's third worldism. And it's wrong. It's wrong because things change, right? And labor aristocracy is a concept that you get in Lenin. It's this idea that it's true that as imperialism was expanding, as capitalism was expanding on a global level, as banking capital became dominant over industrial capital, as the USA and Western Europe started carving out Africa and Asia and different places, as they started carving them out as spheres of influence, as that was happening, I just pulled a Slovak Žižek there. Did you see that? As that was happening, I'm just kidding, but as that was happening, that there was a strata of the working class in the Western countries that started to see their living standards increase, right? They were getting wealthier. Their living standards were increasing. And so they became more conservative, and they became right-wing, and they supported World War I, and because they had this higher status, they had this privilege, and so they were less revolutionary. That's true. And it especially became true during the 1950s, right? A lot of the industrial workers in the United States became very conservative. They banned communists from their unions. They supported the wars, they waved their flags, and there's the very famous example of the Hard Hat Riots, 1970, a few days after the Kent State Massacre, right? May 4th, Kent State, that's tomorrow. Big day for me. I grew up very close to Kent State University, where anti-war protesters were gunned down at Kent State University for protesting against the war. Shortly after that, there was an anti-war rally in Manhattan. And these guys that were part of the construction workers union, they put on their hard hats and they got baseball bats and they got their hammers and their construction tools, and they went and violently attacked these anti-war protesters and injured a lot of them and injured some police officers and beat them up. They had signs that said "better dead than red" and "my country, right or wrong." And they were labor aristocrats. They were workers. These were union members, workers, but they were right-wing as hell. They hated protesters. And, that was the labor aristocracy. But the interesting thing is that the labor aristocracy in the United States has been eroded. And I've written articles about this. Richard Nixon took power because of the right-wing aristocracy of labor. And in fact, there was a TV show that was on the air that was very popular in the 1970s. And it was called All in the Family. And the right-wing Nixon-supporting dad was a guy named Archie Bunker, and he was a construction worker. There's actually an episode where he's yelling at the son, Meathead, for being a protester, and he's saying, "Oh, you violent protesters, and the wife says, "Well, you were violent on the picket line, Archie," and she talks about how he, as a union construction worker, used to be very violent in his pro-labor demonstrations, and they would, anyone who crossed that picket line got their head busted in, Archie. But this, Nixon kind of protected that labor aristocracy. When Nixon was ousted from the White House, Gerald Ford became president, and Gerald Ford immediately brought in, who did he bring into the White House? Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, who went on to be very, very important people in the Bush administration. And who else did he bring in? Alan Greenspan. And who came with Alan Greenspan to the White House to be sworn in as an economic advisor? Who? Who was it? Who got sworn in alongside Alan Greenspan? Ayn Rand, who was Alan Greenspan's mentor. And the neoliberal economists, neoconservatives, they declared war on the labor aristocracy. They started, moving jobs to other countries with trade deals. They just viciously went after, and they started rolling back the labor aristocracy and rolling it back. Modern day Mozambique. Wow, I'm just getting a lot of these. Alrighty, Mozambique. They rolled back the labor aristocracy. And they started, and what we're seeing now, if you look at what's happening to these Rust Belt states where Trump got all the support, is that these states, the labor aristocracy has been demolished. The standard of living is dropping, especially for the next generation. Low wages is the reality of what working class people in the United States are facing. The aristocracy of labor is being rolled back. And so because of that, the potential for solidarity is bigger than ever. Black and brown and white unite, right? Black and white unite and fight. Anti-imperialism, solidarity. Because wages are dropping, now is the time to build a united front and to get, white workers who used to be in that labor aristocracy to stand in solidarity with their black and brown brothers, to stand against the wars, and they are against the wars. The U.S. public is against these wars. The labor aristocracy is being destroyed right now. So now is not the time to announce, there's no future, we can't organize the workers because of, labor aristocracy, no hope. Not the time to do that. Not the time to do that. Now is the time to build solidarity. So there you go. That's all I got to say about that. Okay, plenty to get through, folks, but I'm plowing on ahead. Italian partisans, World War II mafia. Okay, so in Italy, Mussolini was the dictator. World War II happens, and there's a resistance force in Italy to Mussolini. It's called the Partisan Brigades. It's led by communists, and there's actually a song, soy comunista toda la vida. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 soy comunista toda la vida. And, Bella Ciao is like the song of the Partisan Brigades. It's like a loved song by communists around the world. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao. It's like he's saying goodbye to his beautiful wife because he's a partisan fighter and he's going to go out and fight the fascists. And so the communists built these armed groups that fought against Mussolini and were fighting on the side of the Allies during World War II. And the communists were loved. They were kind of heroes for fighting against the fascists. So after World War II, the Communist Party is going to run in the elections, right? They're building a new Italian government. Mussolini's been overthrown. The Communist Party is going to run in the elections. So the CIA launched a program called Operation Gladio, and that was to keep the communists from winning the elections. That was the idea, to keep the communists from winning the elections in Italy. And they did all kinds of crazy shit. They planted fake news stories against them. They paid fascist groups to attack communists. They paid ultra-leftist groups to do terrorist violence that would discredit the communists. They call it the Years of Lead. The Years of Lead, because it was in Italy. Bombs were going off. Communist groups were fighting each other. Fascist groups were fighting each other. There was all kinds of crazy politics in Italy in the 50s and 60s because the CIA was actively trying to manipulate Italian politics and keep the Italian Communist Party from winning the elections, right? And it was crazy. And the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, they did the polling data. The majority of Italians supported the Communist Party. So how could they prevent a communist government from getting peacefully elected in Italy? How could they do it? And they did all kinds of crazy shit. And there's all kinds of stuff written about it. And like I talked about, funding fascist groups. I talked about funding ultra-leftist groups. Oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Read about how crazy it got. This person mentioned the mafia. The mafia was involved. It was nuts. Like the lengths that they went to fight communism in Italy was ridiculous, right? And the CIA, millions of our tax dollars were spent to try and prevent the Italian people from electing a communist government. Election fraud was carried out. All kinds of stuff was done. But here's the thing, folks, and here's what makes it all crazy. How did they ultimately stop the Communist Party in Italy? What did they ultimately do? They bought it off. I mean, instead of, paying ultra-leftists to attack it, paying fascists, they bought it off. That was it, right? 1978, there was all kinds of think tanks in Italy that were socialistic and left-wing that were getting CIA money, right? And, they started, giving covert funding and support. Wow, Smith Act. Okay, Smith Act. All right. started getting funding and support. And in 1978, the Italian Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party, the Communist Party of France. Yeah, I see and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the legality, the Smith Act legality. All right. And, they had a meeting and they'd been bought off, and these kind of synthetic left forces within the Italian Communist Party, these new left elements, who had gotten funding and gotten support, kind of took over the Italian Communist Party. And in 1978, they announced they were cutting ties with the Soviet Union, and they were for a new way, they called it. They said the Soviet Union was Stalinist and authoritarian, and they became Euro-communists. And Brzezinski, the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, said, he called them Euro-communists. And that was the rise of Euro-communism. And ultimately, that led to the Italian Communist Party eventually dissolving. Now it's dissolved. But that was ultimately what happened. What the CIA did to destroy the Italian Communist Party, what worked was just manipulating their thought by funding them, by giving, professors and academics in the Italian Communist Party money to write books and, nudging them to think in a certain way and pushing synthetic left ideology. They eventually got the Italian Communist Party to be anti-Soviet, to abandon the goal of socialist revolution, and to just kind of eventually, I think in the 90s, it just stopped being the Italian Communist Party. There was something called the democratic forces of the left. That's what's left of it. There are communists in Italy, right? There are all kinds. There's the communist, there's the Italian, what is it? The Party of Communist Renaissance, or is it, I forget what it's called. It's, but there's a lot of communist parties in Italy, but the massive communist party, the big organization that fought Mussolini and all that has been, was wiped out by funding it, by manipulating it. And I talk about that in my new book, and it's worth talking about. And the person referred to the mafia. The Communist Party, the dock workers in Italy were in communist-controlled unions. And there was a fear on the part of the CIA. And this is all talked about. There's a lot published about this. You can read about Operation Gladio, and there's a lot about this. But the dock workers in Italy, like the dock workers in France and other countries, were organized into communist unions. So there was an effort by the CIA to make sure that they were driven out. And they used the mafia. And a lot of crime families and stuff were used to drive communist union organizers off the docks in Italy. And I think that's what the question was about. Okay, next question. Houthis, right? Well, the Houthis, that's Ansar Allah. They're in Yemen, and they are anti-imperialists. They are Shia Muslims, but they're not Twelvers like in Iran. They actually pray like Sunni Muslims do. They don't recognize 12 imams. They're Zaydi Shias, and they are fighting against Saudi Arabia, and they're in coalition with communists. They're in coalition with nationalists and supporters of the former President Saleh. That's all there is to it. And they are anti-imperialists, right? They're basically, their goal is, they say that they are fighting for an independent Yemen that will control its resources. Their logo, it has a hand that represents God. That hand is holding a gun, and that gun represents, the right to armed self-defense. And then there's a shaft of wheat, and that represents economic development. They're fighting with the gun for economic development and for religion. One thing about the Houthis is that they wave guns at rallies. You'll see footage of them, videos of them, and they're having their rallies. They're all waving their guns. And they're waving their guns. People look at that and say, oh, there's a bunch of crazy barbarians. What are they waving their guns for? What is this, the Wild West or something? Well, their religion, they believe it is the duty of every male to have a gun. That is part of their religion, that if you are a male, you must own a gun to protect your household. And Yemen is very much like the Wild West, right? It's a very underdeveloped country. James Connolly, all right. Oh, boy, right? It's a very underdeveloped country. And, the Zaydi Shia, they live in the northern part of the country, and they have faced oppression. The government has tried, the Saudi puppet government that was there until the revolution, has tried to prevent them from having routine religious services and all of that. And so they have had to fight. There's been an armed struggle, carving out liberated territories and all that. I gave a great presentation about it. But yeah, the Houthis are an anti-imperialist force. That's all there is to it. I mean, they're not looking to take over the country. They want a coalition government. They want, secular forces in the south. To have they want like federalism. They want to be able to, because most of the country in Yemen doesn't share their religious beliefs, right? Most of the country is Sunni. They're Shia, but they're Zaydi Shia. They want kind of federalism. They want the Southern movement to be able to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. I bet you didn't know that. The half of Yemen used to be a socialist country, the DPRY, the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. They want to restore the DPRY in the south and let the communists and socialists back in power there. They want to have, regional autonomy and have their Islamic, like Shia government in the northern mountainous regions of Yemen. That's the Houthis. And the Saudi government, with U.S.-made weapons and U.S.-made supplies, is bombing Yemen and killing thousands of people have died, and they have killed students, and they have killed hospital workers, and they have killed all kinds of people. It's awful. It is horrendous. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable what has been done, and it's completely unacceptable. And that's all I can say about that. And this war is going on. I attempted to deliver humanitarian aid with the Red Crescent Society in 2015. We were not able to deliver any humanitarian aid, and that's a whole nother story. And yeah, I mean, the war in Yemen is an outrage. Yemen is the Vietnam of our time. It's the people of Yemen fighting for control of their country, for national liberation. That's what's going on there. And they're trying to make it complicated on the news as some big complicated tribal thing. No, it's not. It's the Western capitalist countries aligned with Saudi Arabia trying to keep Yemen an impoverished client state. And the Yemeni people, some of them Houthis, some of them communists, some of them nationalists, some of them Muslims. I mean, they're all fighting for their national liberation. That's what's going on. And they continue to fight. Right? They're facing Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget of any country in the world. They're waging all-out bombardment, and the people of Yemen keep fighting. And they want to say they're just Iranian agents. Oh, Iran did this. Iran is paying them. That's all this is. Bull honky. Bull honky. Right? If Iran was just paying for this, it would have been over by now. It's 5 years the people of Yemen have been fighting for their national liberation. They're not Iranian agents. They're not Iranian proxies. They're not Iranian puppets. They're people who want to be free. Right? That's just the reality of the situation. Okay, about the Houthis. So the next question I had was advice for an 18-year-old who's aspiring to be a Marxist journalist. Well, the main thing to do is start doing your own work. Start writing articles, start making videos, start doing your own work. I set up this channel like a decade ago. I'm going to talk, if I have time later, about how important it is that you do your own work and you don't let people suppress you. And maybe I'll talk about that later. But the main thing is set up a blog, set up a website, and start doing your own work. If you want to get into this, I would encourage you to start doing your own work, start researching topics, start writing, start making videos. That's my advice to you. Sorry, I'm going to start giving short answers because we got a lot to get through here. All right, so Christianity and capitalism. Right? Christianity and capitalism. Well, are they incompatible? In my view, they are, yes. Because Christ, talked about caring for the poor. He talked about how the last shall be first and the first shall be last. The disciples originally lived collectively, and they held all things in common. Christ drove the money changers out of the temple. Yes, I would argue that capitalism and Christianity are incompatible. And the Catholic Church believes that, actually. The Catholic Church condemns both capitalism and Marxism. I'm not Catholic, but the Christian anti-capitalism long predates socialist anti-capitalism, right? There's, the Catholic Church, was very, there's a reason they called it money. Money was filthy lucre, right? It was considered a sin to handle money at one point. And that Christian opposition, religious opposition to the rule of profits and markets is long-standing. There was a feeling as capitalism was emerging, this isn't right. People are not guided by moral laws. They're not guided by what's right and wrong. They're simply guided by making profits, and that's not in line. Religion is supposed to guide people to act in a moral way and to not be purely selfish, and capitalism is motivating people to do bad things. I believe John Maynard Keynes, he said, capitalism is the idea that the most despicable men, for the most despicable reasons, will work in the interests of all. And many religious people have been outspoken against it. There you go. Okay. All right. So someone's asking me if I've heard of a particular edition of The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State by Engels. I've read that book. I think the version I read was from International Publishers. But, it's an important work of Marxism. And it's important to point out what the book actually says. Because this is the basis of people that say Marxists want to destroy the family. They're sexual. What does the book actually say? What does the book by Frederick Engels actually say? Frederick Engels says that, and he's right, that prior to the origin of agriculture, humans were tribal. They were like hunter-gatherers. They lived in tribes. In those tribes, sexual relations went on, but there was not an institution of marriage, right? They didn't keep track of whose kid was whose kid. They were hunter-gatherer tribes. They spent their days hunting and gathering and desperately trying to survive. The tribes were very authoritarian, mind you, right? I mean, they wouldn't tolerate anything from their members, right? I mean, if you were not pulling your weight in the tribe, you were dealt with. But, people have it in their heads that this was like egalitarian anarchism or something. There was no one exploiting anyone else. There was no hierarchy, right? Everyone was basically equal in the tribe for the most part, but there was a lot of authoritarianism. Can you imagine being that dependent on like less than 30 other people? Like whether you eat or not depends on 30 other people pulling their weight. Are you going to let anyone slack? Of course not. These were very authoritarian tribes, but there was not a strict gender division in the tribes. There was no ruling class, right? If you killed the animal, you might get the nicest cut of meat. But other than that, they were hunting and gathering, and they made sure everyone had what they needed, and they were dependent on each other. And there really wasn't a family within the tribes, right? In hunter-gatherer civilization, they really didn't have a family. Every child was a child of the whole tribe, right? And there was no hereditary stuff, and they worshipped women, right? They had mother goddess because women produced babies. So there was a feeling that women were somehow, more holy or sacred than men. And there were deities, religious deities that were women, mother goddess, right? And that's 75% of human existence was hunter-gatherer civilization. Well, we got too good at it, right? We got really good at hunting and gathering. There were scarcities. There were shortages of animals, shortages of fruits and nuts to gather. So class society comes into existence, right? And we start growing our own food. We start domesticating animals. At that point, it becomes important to keep track of whose kid is whose kid. So the family is invented as a mechanism for keeping track of whose kid is whose kid, so that when someone dies, the land goes to somebody. That's the idea, right? That's the origin of the family. And originally, the family was one man, like a landowner, right? And all of his kids and all of his women. And he had many women, right? It was polygamy. Well, thousands of years later, in the West, in most of the world, we have monogamy. One man, one woman. Well, now we're starting to have gay marriage, right? In Western countries, now it's men and men, women and women, in addition to men and women, right? And what Engels shows is that the family, as an institution, evolves. It changes over time, and it's rooted in the economic system. That's all he shows. And he's right? There's not this idea that there's a sacred family. There's this ideal way. And I heard this when I was growing up. The Bible says one woman plus one man equals marriage. No, it doesn't. The Bible says you can have more than one wife. But we've changed since then. Our economic system has changed. We don't have landowners. Society changes over time. The family as an institution changes, right? And that, women have been very badly treated. There's, wives having no rights and daughters and, yes, the family as an institution has changed with society. And that's a good thing. And it should keep changing. It should be more egalitarian. People shouldn't be, but does that mean that we're all out to just separate every family? No, absolutely not. And I would say that capitalism is destroying the family in a lot of ways, right? I think people should have freedom, but people coming together, people working together, people, people cooperating, people depending on each other, parents feeding and caring for their children and giving them support. This is all a good thing. I'm not against the family at all. I think that the form that the family takes changes in different societies. That's a fact. And that's what Marxism realized, right? Is that the family has changed over time, and it will keep changing. The family might be different under socialism, might be different under communism, but this idea that we see kids playing with their parents, and that makes us mad. How dare they? We want to destroy the family because we're evil commies. Oh, how dare they? Kids are having a birthday party. Their parents gave them something. We can't tolerate that. This is silliness, right? This is not, and that's what has been, that's what has been characterized. And I will say that academia, there is like a gender movement and all of that. I don't represent them. I don't speak for them, but that's what I'm saying. That's not me, right? I mean, there's gender studies and all of that. That's not where I'm at, right? I took women's studies in college, and I mean, feminism and women have been oppressed and all that. But there are people that do think different things than what I'm saying here, and I'm not responsible for those people, and they speak for themselves. But as someone who understands Marxism, as someone who speaks for Marxism, I'm telling you what Marxism says, what Engels says in Family Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, and that's that the family changes based on material conditions, and that it evolves and changes, and that's just a reality, and that there's not a sacred, unchanging unit, as many forces would like to pretend. And that's all Marxism has to say on it, right? And other people take it in another direction. They're free to do that, but I don't speak for them, and there you go. I hope I haven't beat that into the ground. Okay, all right. All right, so next I was asked about Warren Buffett giving up his airlines. Well, yeah, I mean, now is not a good time to invest in airline technology. I mean, Warren Buffett is a legendary investor. He knows where the money is, and airlines is not a good place to have your money right now. I mean, who knows when this pandemic stuff is going to end? I hope it ends soon, for goodness sakes. I really do, and so do a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, it's not a good day for the airline industry. Okay. North Korea gunfire, very scary, very dangerous provocation. We have a government in South Korea that is open to being friendly to the North. We have North Korea. They were trying to say Kim Jong Un was dead. He's clearly not dead. I was so annoyed when they were saying, "Oh, he's dead. He's dead." Well, let's wait and see. And he wasn't dead, lo and behold, right? And that was not good. That's a threat. That was a threat. That was a threat on his life. And that's why people were saying, "What do you think about that?" It's like, I don't know, right? We'll find out. And it was a lie. A lot of what we hear about North Korea is a lie. Kim Jong-un is alive. He's alive, but who knows? Maybe that was setting the stage for some kind of provocation. I don't know what happened with this gunfire exchange. Very scary, because the people of South Korea want peace. The people of North Korea want peace. Look at the Olympic Games, where there was just massive cheering and celebration when the Olympic team came out. The people of the Korean Peninsula want peace. The ruling class doesn't, and that's all I got to say for that. Universal basic income. I mean, if people were to get a universal basic income, that would be a good thing, but it's not the answer, right? It would be a gain. I think if people were to get some support, especially in a time like this, that would be good, and we should not oppose that. We should advocate it, but it's not going to solve the problem. Just giving everyone a bunch of free money is not going to solve the problem. It's an attempt to create stability. I read the book written by Andrew Yang, and if you read it, he sees the problems of capitalism, and he's saying as a technocrat, how do we stabilize society? And that's a division within the ruling class. The entrepreneurial, the people out there wanting to open things up, the people supporting Trump, they want the government hands off, they just want to make money. But there's a section of the ruling class, tied to the richest of the rich, that want to stabilize society. They don't want massive social upheavals and protests, they want to stabilize society. Now, Nick is saying his question's about permanent UBI. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you asked about permanent UBI, and I'm talking about permanent UBI. And they realize capitalism, if you read about what they wrote about automation, it's using fewer and fewer workers, and they see UBI as a way to kind of stabilize society. That's what they want to do with it. And they hope it's a way that we can just kind of hold off, and hold back. And again, if it were implemented, that would be a good thing. I'd be in favor of it. I would be in favor of implementing it, but it's not the solution. And there are potentially some big problems with it. But ultimately it would be a good thing if it were implemented, but it's not the answer. It's not socialism. It's not going to solve the problems of capitalism. Giving everyone free money, it's better than giving them nothing, but it's not going to solve the problems. Not going to solve the problems. And a lot of advocates of neoliberalism have been supporters of UBI. And the reason that they've been supporters of UBI is because they say, look, we can just solve the problems, by and just give everyone a check. We can shut down the Department of Labor. We can shut down the Department of Agriculture and Food Stamps. Just give everyone a check and just give them some money, and we can get rid of a lot of government jobs. So, yeah. Now, Hannah Arendt. I was asked about Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was a leftist intellectual, and she was part of the milieu that was funded by the CIA, right? The Congress for Cultural Freedom was the CIA program that was subsidizing various magazines and leftist outlets. And, they had a magazine called Partisan Review. And Partisan Review started promoting the work of Hannah Arendt. And her concept was totalitarianism. And mainly the people who had worked with the CIA to put out this kind of fake left message in the 1950s were Trotskyites, right? You had, like Irving Howe and different kind of people. And they would argue that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were the same. Stock market moral. All right. They would argue that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were the same, right? Because they're both, bureaucratic collectivism, they're both state capitalism, they're the same, right? And that was a big theme among Trotskyites, right? And if you read about, I'm trying to remember his name, James Burnham, he wrote a book called The Managerial Revolution, and he argued this, right? They're the same. That's what Vosh thinks, that they're the same, right? And this idea that the Soviet Union that's fighting against imperialism and opposing racism and all that is just the same as Nazi Germany. But most of them made economic arguments because Marxism was the big current in the 1930s and 40s. So if you read James Burnham, you read Irving Howe, they make this argument, Max Shachtman, they make this argument in a very, very economically based way. Hannah Arendt comes along. She makes the argument in a different way. She argues that totalitarianism, that it's about political evil, right? And she has this whole theory of totalitarianism that has nothing to do with economics. It's about suppressing intellectuals and the freedom of intellectuals. It's about mob rule, and she presents totalitarianism, and she talks about anti-Semitism being inherent in totalitarianism. She has this whole theory of totalitarianism, and she comes out of that milieu. She's a Trotskyite. She hangs out with all the Trotskyites, but she's the first one to start analyzing and writing this anti-communist garbage for the CIA, but she's not using economic analysis. And then what really makes Hannah Arendt stand out, is she writes a book about the trial of the Nazi. What's his name? Oh gosh, his name is escaping me now. The Nazi. What is his name? I don't want to get the name wrong. He's the Nazi. He's Adolf Eichmann. She talks about Adolf Eichmann, right? Adolf Eichmann is a Nazi. He escapes to Argentina. He's kidnapped from Argentina, taken back to Israel, and put on trial for his crimes. He's a participant in the Holocaust, and he's found guilty and hanged. So she goes and she writes this book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, describing the trial of Adolf Eichmann. And her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, makes the point that Adolf Eichmann is an ordinary person. Right? It's a study in what she calls the banality of evil, like the ordinariness or the uninterestingness or the unoriginalness of evil. And she says he's a normal guy. He was part of the YMCA. He, got mediocre grades in school. He's just a normal guy. Just a normal guy. And he's not that creative. He's not that smart. His interviews, he's not some, maniacal bad guy. He's not, twirling his mustache like Snively Whiplash. He's not, monstrous evil. He's just an ordinary guy. That's her message. That's true, right? If we had, God forbid, a fascist regime in the United States, I'm sure there'd be a lot of ordinary people who would be involved in it, right? The prison industrial complex, there's a lot of prison guards that are ordinary people, right? When states do things, governments do things, whole societies are involved in doing them, and ordinary people carry them out. That's just a fact. And when you have a fascist state like a Nazi Germany that builds concentration camps and gasses millions of people to death for no other reason than their race or ethnicity or disability or political views or whatnot, or sexual orientation, ordinary people are going to be involved in the process. And that, Eichmann wasn't this ideological Nazi thinker. He was an ordinary guy. It's the banality of evil. That's the point of her book. It's an interesting point to make. But what's scary about that point? And this points to the problem with the synthetic left. It's the same with Susan Sontag. It's the same with Hannah Arendt. It's the same with all of them. They don't see capitalism as the enemy. They see ordinary people as the enemy, right? That comes across. You read Sontag, you read Hannah Arendt, you read even some of the more Trotskyist Marxist economic stuff, you read Adorno, the authoritarian personality. They don't think capitalism is the problem. They think ordinary people are the problem. Ordinary people are not intellectual enough. They follow rules. They have authoritarian personalities. They have families. They have traditional families. They like things to be very clear, and they don't like shades of gray. They want things to be very precise. They follow rules. Ordinary people are the enemy. I kid you not. Right? That comes across. Look at the Frankfurt School. You look at the synthetic left. The enemy stops being capitalism and the system, and it starts being ordinary people. Ordinary people aren't smart enough. Ordinary people are too conforming. Ordinary people don't want chaos, and these people want chaos, right? Ordinary people want order and stability, but they want chaos. Ordinary people don't like the right kind of music. Ordinary people aren't sexual enough. Ordinary people are the enemy. And that is a big point that the synthetic left makes. Ordinary people are the enemy. And that's nuts. And that's not Marxist. It's dangerous. It's poison. Ordinary people are the enemy. So, of course, these people trade Marxian economics for Malthusianism. Malthusianism says there's too many ordinary people. They're breeding too much. Let's eliminate them. That's not Marxism. Marx ripped Malthus to shreds. But, this element, you can call it, right? The synthetic left, the middle class, the revolutionary intelligentsia, always a part of socialism. But the CIA starts funding and promoting their worst element, their worst tendencies, their elitism, their desire for chaos and destruction, their contempt for order and stability. They start funneling money into it. They start promoting them. Roosevelt, right? He promoted and funded social realist art, beautiful paintings in post offices of working class people. And social realism, a beautiful movement from the 1930s of art that spoke to people's needs, talked about unemployment, talked about social justice, talked about racism. Beautiful movement. In the 50s, the CIA starts funding. What do they start funding? The CIA starts funding not social realism, but abstract art, right? Jackson Pollock splattering paint on a canvas, right? And ordinary people are the problem. That viewpoint, right? Ordinary people are the problem. They're the mob. They're going to take away our individuality. This stuff is really, really dangerous, and it's not Marxism. That's my issue with Hannah Arendt. I hope that answered your question. Okay. All right. Hannah Arendt. All right. We're moving right along here. Okay. So I was asked about indigenous communism. Well, the indigenous societies of North America and elsewhere, a lot of them did have, tribal hunter-gatherer, mode of production. They practiced, a primitive form of communism, right? They were hunter-gatherers to some degree or other. Now, the Aztecs and the Incas were not. They had advanced toward more of a feudal model. But yes, the indigenous tribes had more of a communist mode of production and a communist, it was primitive tribal communalism. Yeah, and, the Soviet Union, they highlighted the crimes against the indigenous people. There was a hit song by Dean Reed, who was a Soviet musician, Pine Ridge Reservation, Wounded Knee in 73, right? And, I know the American Indian movement cooperated with the Black Panthers, and they talked against imperialism and stuff. And, the indigenous community, there is an anti-imperialism. And I spent some time on a reservation when I was in high school, and I saw it for myself. There's a pride in their history. There's anti-imperialism. They talk about wars, and it's there. Totally there. Okay. Mozambique. Well, SWAPO, I believe, right? Is it SWAPO? No, that's in Namibia. Mozambique, they come out of a revolution. It's a communist party that's in power there. But, it's a very poor country. The Soviet Union fell. It's a Marxist-Leninist party with Marxist-Leninist roots. I was able to meet some revolutionaries from Mozambique at some of the international communist gatherings. They have a market economy, but the state, is in control. But it's a very, very poor country. And that's the thing, in Southern Africa, the Soviet Union had done a lot to support the people of South Africa, to support the people of Zimbabwe, to support the people of Angola, to support the people of of Namibia in fighting for their independence. There's actually a book called The Hot Cold War, the USSR in Southern Africa, which is very good. And the Soviet Union had done a lot to support those people, and then it fell. Just as apartheid was ending in South Africa, and it fell. And because of that, it was very difficult for these countries to start building socialism, right? I mean, you can remember that one of the arguments that was blatantly said, right, that if Nelson Mandela took power in South Africa, South Africa would become the Cuba of Africa, and it would spread communism throughout the continent. Hong Kong, okay, all right. Be spreading communism throughout the continent, and that didn't happen because at the time that it happened, they didn't have Soviet support, and that it was complicated, right? And that there were a lot of compromises that were made. So, Mozambique, and Angola to some degree too. I mean, they're doing their best now. Angola has moved in a more revolutionary direction. They've actually been working with China and all of that. In South Africa, there's divisions in the ANC. There's the Economic Freedom Party, and there's a lot going on there, and there's turmoil there. But these countries ultimately couldn't move in a full-on socialist direction because of the fall of the Soviet Union, because they're really, really, really poor. I mean, the level of economic development is very, very low. And that's the thing. You can't build socialism on the basis of poverty. You can't do it. Look at Pol Pot. Yeah, you can't do it. Socialism requires material abundance. So these countries are doing their best. And, the comrades in Mozambique, the comrades in Namibia, comrades in Angola, the comrades in South Africa, the comrades in Zimbabwe, they're doing their best. They've done some land redistribution. They're trying their hardest to try and raise their people out of poverty. It's difficult. And the stronger that Russia and China get, the stronger that they'll have someone who can trade with them more in a non-predatory manner. That'll be better. And they can develop. And, there was the BRICS, and South Africa has seen some real expansion. So it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. All righty. All right. The Smith Act, right? So the Smith Act was a law that was passed in 1940 that it made it illegal to preach the violent overthrow of the U.S. government or any ideology that, it made it illegal to be a communist. And it was used against the Trotskyists. During World War II, they were, calling for like union strikes inside the army and stuff like that. And so it was used against them. And the Communist Party supported that. Unfortunately, I don't think I think the Trotskyites should have supported World War II, but, I don't think that the Communist Party should have supported, suppressing them for not supporting it. But regardless, it was first used against the Trotskyists, against James Cannon and some of those other forces that were opposed to World War II. And then after the Second World War in 1948, it was used against the Communist Party USA. And hundreds of members of the Communist Party were jailed under the Federal Smith Act or under many states had local laws that were like the criminal syndicalism law, the anti-communism law in Indiana. Many states had anti-communist laws. The Supreme Court basically said, yeah, and the Communist Party leaders were convicted not for anything they actually said, because the Communist Party was very clear. If you read William Z. Foster's book In Defense of the Communist Party and its indicted leaders, they did not advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. They advocated a peaceful transition to socialism. They were very clear about that, right? Didn't matter, they said, because Lenin had written something in State and Revolution, and they were convicted not of things that they themselves did or said. They were convicted of things that happened in Russia. There were things that Stalin did. They said that, look, they're trying to create, because they say the Soviet Union is good, they're trying to bring the Bolshevik Revolution here. They had some like paid informers who got up and said some stuff. But ultimately, the Communist Party didn't advocate violent revolution. Regardless, didn't matter. They were convicted of it. So then in 1957, they had the Supreme Court ruling, Yates versus the United States, where the Supreme Court said, okay, you can advocate communism and Marxism, you just can't call for violent revolution. That was a change. Now, the Communist Party never called for violent revolution, but the Supreme Court said that this particular individual who had said that, that he advocated, he didn't advocate a violent revolution and was convicted. The Supreme Court heard his case, Yates, and that ruling led to a lot of communists getting out of prison, right? And they stopped prosecuting Communist Party members because unless you could prove that they themselves called for a violent revolution, they could be acquitted. But then I think it was in 1967 or 1969, you have a very strange Supreme Court ruling, right? It's Brandenburg versus Ohio. And folks, this is a Supreme Court ruling that makes no sense to me whatsoever, right? And I mean, it's on the books. This is good law. Brandenburg versus Ohio. So Charles Brandenburg was in Ohio. He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and he bought time on Ohio TV to have a Ku Klux Klan speech or rally. Charlie Brandenburg. And in his speech, he called for, quote, acts of revengeance. Revengeance is not a word. Like he meant vengeance or revenge, but he combined them into acts of revengeance. Acts of revengeance against elected officials for the Civil Rights Act. He didn't agree with the Civil Rights Act, being a Ku Klux Klansman. And on a televised speech, he bought time and he appeared on TV and he said, I want acts of revengeance against legislators who voted for the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, he's arrested, right? He called for acts of revengeance, whatever the hell that is, against elected officials. You can't call for violence against elected officials on TV. Charlie Brandenburg is arrested, right? And he's arrested, oddly, under Ohio's anti-syndicalism law, right? So according to Ohio law, syndicalism is anarchism. So advocating violence against elected officials is syndicalism. So he's arrested for syndicalism, right? So he's arrested for criminal syndicalism. And this goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually says, well, Charles Brandenburg didn't call for a specific act of violence. He didn't call out any specific elected official. He didn't make a specific threat. So we're going to allow it. That makes no sense to me, folks. I don't know of any other country in the world where you can call for violence against elected officials, and you shouldn't be doing it. I mean, that's the law, okay? I mean, that's the Supreme Court. It was the Warren Court, the court of, Earl Warren, Justice Warren, who was appointed by conservatives but became very liberal. And they ruled that Charlie Brandenburg was within his rights to call for acts of revengeance. And so based on that, under U.S. law, you can, as long as you don't call for a specific crime, right? You can get on TV and say, I think people should rob banks, But if you name a specific bank, and that's a crime. But if you just say, if you advocate illegal activity, it's legal in the United States now. And it's interesting because people don't realize in the 1950s, it was illegal to show someone getting away with a crime in a movie, right? The bad guy had to always be caught in the movie. It was a law because people were afraid that people would see the movie, they'd see someone get away with a crime and then go commit crimes, right? Well, the Supreme Court said, no. That's Hollywood. They have the right to show people get away with crimes. It used to be illegal to show all kinds of things in movies. They had a board of film censors and all that. Well, court rulings got rid of that. 1969, Brandenburg versus Ohio. There you go. So, I mean, whatever, right? You can advocate a lot of things. I'm curious. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. So nobody, and a super chat went by really fast. So somebody repeat it. I don't want to miss it. Repeat the super chat, and I'll continue my point about this. Repeat the super chat, please. Repeat the super chat, please. Repeat the super chat, please. Democracy Manifesto, Communist Manifesto, 5 years, very similar. Did Marx and Engels plagiarize it? I know nothing about it. I'll have to go read it. I've never heard that allegation before. Never heard that they plagiarized anything. So never heard that. But, people say anything. I've heard that Karl Marx was a Satanist, right? There's a book, right? Was Marx a Satanist, I heard, and, he had a beard. It was common during Marx's time to have a beard, but it was not a Satanist beard like the one pictured here. I mean, it's like they'll say anything, but, it doesn't sound right to me. I really doubt they plagiarized it, but who knows? I'll take a look. A lot of allegations out there. There's a whole thing about Marx and his housekeeper. I've heard people dispute that, so whatever. But anyway, back to the Smith Act. So the basic overall thrust of the Smith Act has been eliminated by the Supreme Court. You can teach communism in the United States. Absolutely. And apparently, according to, Brandenburg versus Ohio, as long as you don't call for a specific threat, you're okay. I don't know if that's good law anymore, because I understand that a lot of the legislation that came out after 9/11 talks about terrorism, and that there have been a lot of Muslims who have been convicted for terrorism. They've been convicted and prosecuted for terrorism, and they haven't pointed to any specific criminal act. They've said, well, he's espousing a terrorist message, he's urging people to join al-Qaeda or something like that, and he goes to prison. So I don't think Brandenburg is still good law. I think with terrorism laws now, they can get you for not specific criminal acts. And that, we know after Columbine, right, schools started suspending people for their artwork, right? If you wrote an artwork, if you painted a picture of somebody that someone thought was a threat, you were suspended from school. And that this is all very murky now, right? It's all very murky now. It's really not clear where your free speech starts and ends. And the Supreme Court, from what I understand, again, not a legal expert, not a lawyer, has actually kind of gone out of its way not to rule on these cases, right? The Supreme Court only hears a limited number of cases, and they make a point of not hearing these cases. They don't want to say boo. They don't want to go yes or no, right? They don't want to do that. Because there's been a lot of cases against a Muslim, well, first of all, right? The drone strike program. A lot of these people killed in the drone strike program, right? It's like, well, he's a preacher for al-Qaeda. He does radio broadcasts for al-Qaeda. Kill him. Well, is that a crime? Well, not according to Brandenburg versus Ohio, but, we're fighting a war on terror. It's complicated. And, there's a lot of cases where they've grabbed some kind of prominent Muslim leader, said they had ties to al-Qaeda, quoted some things that they said, and it wasn't specific, and the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it. So it's not really clear what the law is right now in the United States about advocacy of illegal activity. It's not clear, right? The terrorism legislation, what does helping a terrorist even mean at this point? What does it mean? Who the hell knows, right? The Mujahideen Khalq was a designated terrorist organization, right? Until Hillary Clinton lifted the rules in 2014. But for decades, in the 90s, all the Republicans were speaking at their events and giving them money, and no one said boo. No one said anything about it. So what does it mean? What does it even mean, right? What does it mean, right? Under Bill Clinton, there was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and it's not clear. The law is very, very murky around advocating illegal activity. If you advocate something illegal, according to the Supreme Court in Charles Brandenburg versus Ohio, it's legal, but then there's been some terrorism cases where that's not the case, and I don't know. I'm not a legal expert, and I think that it's up to the judge. It's up to the judge. It's up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has not ruled. They haven't said what it means. All right. Free speech stuff. Look at the ACLU. They've written a lot about it. The ACLU, they kicked communists out. They kicked Elizabeth Gurley Flynn out for being a communist. But, the ACLU has a lot about how in the age of terrorism, right? Indefinite detentions, that's a violation, habeas corpus, all of that. There's a lot of civil liberties stuff. It used to be very, very clear. It's not very, very clear. Not very, very clear anymore. Not clear anymore. A lot of this civil liberties stuff is not clear anymore. So I'm telling you, I don't know what the Smith Act, what's good with the Smith Act anymore, right? I can tell you what happened in the 50s and 60s with the Smith Act, but I cannot tell you what's happening now. I don't know. I'm just telling you, I don't know. And I'm also telling you that as a Marxist, you shouldn't advocate violent revolution. Marxists don't advocate violent revolution. They advocate a peaceful transition. It's the capitalists who advocate a violent revolution, who wouldn't allow a peaceful transition to take place. We would prefer, and it's not working class to advocate violence. Working class people want stability. They want peace in their communities. They want society to get better, right? And that the synthetic left favors violence. The synthetic left favors chaos and destruction. That's a middle class deviation. Marx called it out. Engels called it out. He wrote a beautiful essay criticizing the followers of Ferdinand Lassalle for their ultra-left crazy ideas, right? That advocating violent revolution, romanticizing violent revolution is a deviation, right? It is a middle-class deviation. It's immature, it's infantile, and it's not serious. Serious working-class people, the broad masses of people, and their millions don't want violence. They don't want chaos. You're lucky you've never lived through a violent revolution. I can tell you that much, right? And that it's seriously, a peaceful transition is what socialists advocate. The capitalists obviously may have other plans, but if you're a serious organizer, you advocate a peaceful transition. End of story. Okay. is it moral to invest in the stock market? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it could be, right? I mean, I think the problem is the system. It's not the choices of individuals, right? I don't think our condemnation of capitalism is a condemnation of capitalists. It's a condemnation of the system. I mean, we call out the capitalists for the things that they do, but it's not a. This is not a moralist critique. The problem with capitalism is we have a system where profits come before people, where the economy is organized to serve profits. But I don't think, I mean, Frederick Engels' father was very, very wealthy and was a capitalist. That didn't stop Frederick Engels from being a Marxist. I mean, our critique is not of individuals. Our critique is of the system, right? A lot of working class people, I know, like a lot of labor unions, for example, their pensions, a lot are tied up in the stock market, right? A lot of working class people through their job, their pension or their money is tied in with some stocks or something. I don't think this is like, it's not about moral condemnation. And that's my problem with a lot of leftism now. I tell people 90% of the boycotts in this world do nothing other than make the boycotters feel good about themselves. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it's about pouring condemnation on anyone who owns a stock. I think it's about pointing to the fact that we have a system where, the goal of corporations simply function to make maximum profits for their shareholders. I bet you didn't know this, that if a CEO is working in the interests of his workers, is working in the interests of his environment, he could be sued by his shareholders because his obligation is to maximize profits for the shareholders, right? And that, stock ownership, the stock market, that was all developed as capitalism was emerging into imperialism. You had, Britain, you had the East India Company and all of this. It's not about piling condemnation on small business owners. It's not piling condemnation on a worker who invests some of their money in a stock. It's about pointing to the problem with the system. And this moralism, right? This idea that everything would be fine if everyone was just a good, ethical, that's missing the point. We're talking about systems here, right? People should make ethical choices. I'll call out people who do wrong things, but I don't think if some working class person buys stock, is that wrong? No, right? I mean, if there's somebody who is very wealthy and they own a big corporation and they come to socialist views, is that, are they bad? Should we say, oh, you're not allowed to be a socialist, you're no, of course not. Like, we need to get beyond this. This isn't about piling moral condemnation. All right, James Connolly, right? James Connolly was an Irish revolutionary. He lived in the United States for a while. He was part of the IWW, but he fought for the liberation of the Irish people. And a lot of his ideas about the national question are similar to Lenin's, right? Marx said there are no nations, workers of the world unite. James Connolly said, I want to fight for my Irish people, for their national liberation. He was against any religious test. He had Protestants, Catholics, and atheists in his army. But he led the Easter Uprising. He was executed afterwards. And there wasn't at first widespread support for the Easter Uprising, but then the way the revolutionaries were executed after they seized the post office was so brutal. It was so humiliating and degrading, the way they publicly executed these Irish freedom fighters, that many of the Irish people were just so deeply offended that the Irish freedom struggle exploded afterwards. Exploded, right? And that's how the Irish Free State was created. And it shows you that, the single spark can start a prairie fire. But yeah, World War I was going on. And during World War I, James Connolly, who was a socialist, he advocated a socialist Ireland. He led an uprising, and the Easter Uprising. And there's a lot written about it, he was a great writer. And he wrote, a poem, We Only Want the Earth, which is very beautifully written. He wrote a lot about the national question and why the Irish people should fight for national liberation. He was a socialist through and through. He was an Irish Lenin, actually, in a lot of ways. And he was killed. James Connolly, right? Anti-imperialist, fighter. Yeah. Great writer. I encourage people to read about him, study his life. A lot you can learn from it. Great national hero of the Irish people. Hong Kong, one country, two systems. Right. Hong Kong was a British protectorate. There was a lot of capitalists in Hong Kong. And when it, became part of the People's Republic of China, China wasn't in a position to just go in and seize all of their property. And so they set up one country, two systems. And that's part of some of the problems we're seeing in Hong Kong is that capitalist class that doesn't like being under the dominion of the Chinese Communist Party, that wants special protections, wants to be able to go onto the Chinese mainland, break the law, and then go back to Hong Kong and follow Hong Kong's laws, right? That's a lot of what's happening in Hong Kong. If you look at it, the issue is extradition. That's the issue, right? It's not about, Beijing telling Hong Kong what to do. It's about capitalists from Hong Kong being able to go onto the mainland, break the law, and not be extradited for it, not be extradited for crimes they committed on the Chinese mainland. That's the issue, right? The capitalists of Hong Kong do not want to have to obey the laws of Beijing on the Chinese mainland. Well, I disagree with that. No U.S. state would allow this. Would we say in Colorado, hey, if people from Colorado come to New York City and break the law, they handle it in Colorado. That's okay, right? We don't extradite. No, right? You break the law in New York City, you break the law in New York City, right? You're going to be tried in New York City courts. You have to obey New York City laws. You break the law in Florida, you have to obey Florida's laws. You're tried in Florida. But Hong Kong had this special arrangement with the Chinese government where they could, break the law in Beijing and they handle it in Hong Kong. They could break the law on the Chinese mainland and they handle it in Hong Kong. That's ridiculous. And there's a lot of wealthy capitalists in Hong Kong with lots of money who don't want to follow the law. They don't want to be accountable to the Chinese Communist Party. This is the Chinese Communist Party saying, look, Hong Kong's part of China. You're going to follow our rules on the Chinese mainland. End of story, right? I mean, if I broke the law on the Chinese mainland, I would be held accountable under Chinese law. Why doesn't that apply to Hong Kong citizens, right? I mean, extradition is the issue. That's really the issue here. So all these protests, and I'm sure that there are working class grievances that people have. I'm sure there's other frustrations. But the initial cause of the protests in Hong Kong is this idea that there should be no extradition of people who break the law on the Chinese mainland to the Chinese mainland, that Hong Kong folks should be, above being extradited to the Chinese mainland. I don't agree with that. So there you go. Folks, this has been a long live, but it's been fun. We had a big win for our community, a very, very big win for our community, very big win by hitting that 10K mark. A lot of people are paying attention to us. Vosh can't ignore us. We are doing something special here. We are fighting for real working class socialism, and no one can ignore us, right? We're tankies and we're proud of it. We're not ashamed to invoke China and the Soviet Union as part of our history. We're doing great stuff. It's been a pleasure. And I can't tell you how special all of you are to me. You guys are so essential to me. I feel deeply close to all of you, all the names that I read. I don't want to say anyone individually because then I'll be not saying somebody else. I cannot tell you how special what we are doing here is. This is amazing what we are doing. I started out the live by saying that I could be talking to the next Lenin right now. I could be talking to the next Che Guevara right now, the next Martin Luther King, the next Malcolm X, the next William Z. Foster, the next Huey Newton, and I really believe it, right? We are doing something special. Thousands of people watch these lives. There's hundreds watching now, but thousands watch these afterwards. The view counts are in the thousands. We are impacting people. We are changing the world. There's an ideological problem. I used to think the issue was we just needed struggle. We need people in the streets. Well, I was wrong. There's an ideological problem in this world. There's a deep ideological problem. We have to confront the capitalist ideology, and we're doing it. And thank you, EE Camp, for that super chat. I appreciate it. We're doing it, right? Another live, or I might make a video. We're going to hear more about this Vosh stuff because a lot of good people listen to him, and he says a lot of bull honky. In addition to the good things, he says a lot of good things too. He's anti-capitalist. He's critical of the right wing. Good for him. But he specifically smeared our community, and we're going to stand up against that. He's gone after me, and he's gone after all of you, and we're not going to tolerate that. We're going to push back. I want a fair debate with that Vosh guy, and he doesn't want a fair debate. He wants me to call in so he can cut me off and scream my head off. I'm not his biggest fan, but, he's on our side, right? He's anti-capitalist, he's anti-imperialist, he's anti-racist. But, he's not been talking a good game about us, and we want to defend ourselves, and we'll push back. I'll call him out more. I'd be happy for a fair debate with him. But, we're doing our thing. People can't ignore us anymore, right? Mahatma Gandhi, he had that thing about first they ignore you, then they suppress you, then they try to take credit for your work. Well, they can't ignore us anymore, so we're going to start getting suppressed. The smears against me are going to escalate, folks. The smears against you are going to escalate. The attacks, the anti-Russian stuff, the red-brown, whatever, it's going to escalate. Now that we're hit the 10K mark, they're going to come after us more viciously. We're more of a threat now. Why? Because we have truth. we have the actual history of Marxism on our side, right? We have the beliefs of, the stuff that W.E.B. Du Bois, right? A tankie named W.E.B. Du Bois believed in, right? We are anti-imperialist. We recognize that the anti-imperialist countries, the two Eurasian superpowers, Venezuela, Cuba, Vietnam, these countries are fighting for socialism in a lot of ways, and they're anti-imperialist, and we're going to get a lot of flack for that. We don't believe in anti-populism. We reject the synthetic left. So we're going to get flack because we're overturning the tables, right? I mean, we are kicking the money changers out of the temple, right? We are movers and shakers, but we're getting things done, and we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. We are going to keep going. We're proud of what we do. We're fighting for the working class. We're fighting for justice. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. More than ever, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. I did a great Q&A, AMA with Blue Politics. I'm going to post it. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I'll end this live the way I end every live. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of reaction. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. I'm going to say it one more time and not screw up this time. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks. Have a good week.